461. The sixth champion, Tom. Half of the steak on his plate remained, but Moody impatiently shoved the rest into his mouth, chewed twice and swallowed. His magical blue eye kept fixed on Karkaroff beside him, its unblinking gaze making the Durmstrang headmaster shift in his seat as if thorns had been pressed into his back. Wiping his mouth with his napkin, Moody pulled out his curved flask, took a long swig, and belched in Karkaroff's direction, his scarred face a mask of disgust. Crouch, immaculate in his robes, turned his head and whispered, "Don't be like that, Alastor. Principal Karkaroff has already proved his usefulness to the ministry." "Oh, I almost forgot, if you hadn't reminded me," Moody grated, his voice thick with sarcasm. "More than 10 years ago, at the Wizengamot, our kind and righteous Principal Karkaroff offered up the names of other Death Eaters." Karkaroff went suddenly pale. The hand clutching his fork trembled. "I did what I had to, Mr. Crouch. We reached an agreement." Crouch raised an eyebrow and smiled without malice. "Yes, we did reach an agreement," Moody snorted. "Betraying his comrades to avoid punishment. How clever." Karkaroff swallowed and said no more. He only wanted the feast to end, indeed, the whole Triwizard tournament to be over. Why had Dumbledore offered this man a post at Hogwarts? What could a man like that teach young wizards? How to knock someone out most efficiently, how to get information without Veritaserum, how to torture without leaving marks. And Crouch, the smooth politeness, made Karkaroff more uneasy than any overt threat. It was as if a huge serpent hid beneath his skin. Hadn't Crouch always been the stickler for rules? "Exactly," Crouch murmured to the potions master beside him. "Assess the situation and make the right choice. Severus, what do you think?" "Please call me Snape, Mr. Crouch," Snape said flatly. He met Crouch's look with nothing on his face. Snape knew what Crouch was getting at. His name had been among those Karkaroff had surrendered. "Besides," Snape added, "this is between the two of you. I am, for the moment, only the potions master at Hogwarts." "A shame," Crouch said, regret softening his tone. "I always thought your talents went further than that." Snape regarded him for a long moment and said nothing. The conversation at the high table had a weight to it, but across the hall, the atmosphere was lively. Dumbledore's dry jokes and Bagman's blustering stories set people laughing. Madame Maxime raised her glass more than once. Only Professor Flitwick pinched his nose. Hagrid's strong cologne was making him queasy. As the feast wound down and most of the students had eaten and drunk their fill, Dumbledore stood. Underneath a hush of expectation, he announced, "Attention, please. The Triwizard Tournament will now make its selection." He gestured, and the torches along the walls went out. Only a few scattered candles burned, leaving the great hall dim. From the goblet of fire, a blue-white flame flickered, and then suddenly swelled until it was the brightest light in the room. Without warning, the flame flushed red and sent off a shower of sparks. A half-charred scrap of parchment spat out and fluttered into Dumbledore's hand. He scanned it and called, clear and steady, "The Durmstrang champion is Victor Krum." Applause and cheers rolled across the hall. Krum rose from the Durmstrang table, his face still set in its usual gloom. At Karkaroff's prompt, he made his way through the side door and into the champion's room. "Bravo, Victor! I knew you'd be the champion!" Karkaroff's shout was audible, but it came out thin and forced. Ron muttered, "No surprise there, is there? You know Krum." The cup flickered again. 2 more charred slips flew out. "The Beauxbatons champion," Dumbledore intoned, "is Fleur Delacour." Fleur rose amid a murmur of admiration, tossed her silvery hair, and drifted from the Beauxbatons' table toward the stage. Then the cup spat out another scrap. "The Ilvermorny champion, Pykel Greaves." A roar followed as Greaves stumbled to his feet, dazed, and was shepherded toward the champion's room. When the 4 champions had entered, the hall quieted, though the sense of excitement thrummed in the air. Every student in Hogwarts robes knew what came next. The flames leaped. Dumbledore raised his hand and said, "The Hogwarts champion is Cedric Diggory." A tide of cheers swept the hall. Hufflepuff students leapt and stamped. Cedric smiled broadly, acknowledged friends, and strolled from his seat into the waiting room. As the roar died down, Dumbledore added, "Now that our 4 champions have been chosen, I trust you will all support them, students from Beauxbatons, Ilvermorny, and Durmstrang as well. By cheering on your champions, you'll help make this tournament a success." A sudden crackle of sparks interrupted him. The goblet flared again, more violently this time. Red flames spat, and two more scorched pieces of parchment shot out and fluttered to the ground. Dumbledore caught them and looked down. The hall waited. After a moment, he cleared his throat and read, "Hogwarts, Harry Potter." Silence fell so complete it felt like a held breath. Eyes darted to the boy with the lightning bolt scar. A hum of incredulity spread through the room like an angry swarm. The adults at the high table exchanged glances, some peering at Harry, some studying Dumbledore. Only Ludo Bagman's face lit up. Underdog, dark horse, odds. The words sped through his head and turned, as if by magic, into one shining image. Galleons. He could hardly suppress a smile. "Principal Dumbledore, what's on the other slip?" "Read that out as well," Bagman urged, his voice suddenly sharp with hope. Seeing Dumbledore hesitate, Bagman lunged forward, snatched the remaining scrap, and blurted it out. "The sixth champion is Tom Gaunt, Azkaban?" The words blew through the great hall like a draught. Conversation died. Moody's magical eye whirled as if it might spin from its socket. Heads turned slowly toward the name. The professors who had had dealings with the ministry paled. They all knew what Azkaban implied. Principal Fontana's face tightened. "Isn't that the man I hired last year? I thought he was imprisoned in Azkaban for breaking the law." Crouch's smile deepened into something unreadable. He took the paper from Bagman, turned it over in his fingers as if it were an intriguing trinket, then leaned toward Dumbledore and whispered. Dumbledore considered a moment, then shouted, "Harry Potter! Harry! Come up here, please!" Harry, dazed and stunned, sat frozen for a heartbeat. "Go," Hermione urged softly, and Ron gave him a gentle shove. Under 1,000 watchful eyes, Harry made his way along the long table and through the door. "To return to my point," Dumbledore said, voice steady as the great hall watched him, "I expect you will all support your school's champions. Cheer for them. Your support matters." He folded his hands. "Although there have been unexpected occurrences in the selection, please trust the tournament committee and judges. We will handle the matter. Now, please leave the hall in an orderly fashion under your prefect's guidance. Our professors will escort the visiting students." Before he left, Harry caught Dumbledore's clear blue eyes and felt something like a plea in them. He straightened, then ducked his head. He had done nothing wrong, but he felt guilty all the same. He must have found another way to get past the age line, right? Ron said with a strained laugh as they followed a knot of students up the spiral staircase. "It can't be the invisibility cloak. The invisibility cloak would have covered both him and me. He must have done something last night, and he said today that nobody would see. He's smart, not like me." He tried to sound cheerful, but disappointment colored his voice. "You certainly look like a fool right now, Ron," Hermione snapped. "You can't even say his name. What are you going to do? Call him Potter when you see him later?" Loren opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. "Clear out some of those Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from your head and think. Harry's name and Lord Voldemort's name turned up in the tournament at the same time. What does that—" Hermione stopped as she saw Loren's guilty expression, and the realization hit her like a punch. She smacked his shoulder in annoyance. Bang! Loren rubbed his shoulder and smiled sheepishly. Hermione grabbed his arm and dragged him into a corner of the common room. "You're coming with me. You have to explain yourself. What on earth were you thinking?" Ron watched them go, shrugged, and began to consider Hermione's words. His face grew serious. In the champions' room, the fire burned bright and golden. Portraits of wizards hung on the walls, and shadows lengthened behind the 4 champions seated around the hearth: Victor Krum, Fleur Delacour, Pykel Greaves, and Cedric Diggory. Harry stood hesitant in the doorway until Bagman bustled up, grabbed his arm, and grinned, chattering. "Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you, astonishing as it may seem, the 5th champion of the Triwizard Tournament." The champions showed mixed reactions. Krum and Fleur looked mildly displeased. Cedric, puzzled, gave Harry a warm smile. Greaves merely shrugged. Harry felt Bagman's peculiar pleasure at his unexpected status, like a man who had just smelled money. The headmasters and professors filed in. After a little commotion, Dumbledore fixed Harry with a calm look and asked, "Did you put your name into the Triwizard Tournament, Harry?" 1,000 thoughts flashed through Harry's mind. Voldemort's name, Bagman's eagerness, the goblet's spitting of names. He wanted to explain so many things, yet at Dumbledore's calm face he simply shook his head. No. Did you ask an older student to put your name in? No. He thought of George and Fred and of other ways the rules might be evaded. There had to be another method, he told himself. He's lying. Hogwarts can't have two champions. That's outrageously unfair. Madame Maxime rumbled, nearly setting the chandelier clinking with her indignation. What does this mean, Dumbledore? You must withdraw the tournament. My students must be allowed to re-register, Karkaroff demanded, his face a storm. If you cannot correct this, we at Durmstrang will not participate, ever. Principal Fontana frowned, concern for his own school showing in his voice. Moody barked, Empty threats, Karkaroff. They must participate. It's bound by magical contract. But, after a chaotic flurry of argument, the consensus hardened. Harry had not broken the age line himself. Someone else must have put his name in. Whether that act was malicious or not remained unknown. The decision in the end rested with the two ministry officials present. Bagman, rubbing his chin, addressed the assembly. It's certainly surprising, but the age restriction was added only this year as an extra precaution. Once a name is produced by the goblet, well, the rules are very clear. They must be followed. Crouch nodded gravely. We must follow the regulations. The rules state that anyone whose name is selected by the goblet is obliged to compete. My dear Madame Maxime, if you have an alternative proposal, I am willing to hear it, Dumbledore said gently. Madame Maxime only glared. Dumbledore continued, None of us understands how this has happened, but in my view, we have no choice but to accept it. Bagman rubbed his hands and smiled. Very well then, let us begin our preparations and give the champions their guidance. Wait, Principal Fontana said at last. He had been quiet until now. What of the other slip of paper? Crouch's eyes gleamed. He hesitated a heartbeat, then said, I will notify the ministry at once. Aurors will begin an investigation into that name. Before the tournament ends, I will provide a satisfactory answer. Chapter 4, Delacour Monday, Cloudy. The Great Hall still wore the trappings of the Triwizard Tournament. Silk and emblems of the 4 schools hung from the walls, and Beauxbaton's banners, edged with gold tassels, caught the light. A first-year Ravenclaw girl sat lost in thought at her table. Fleur Delacour pressed a hand to her little sister's shoulder. You stay in the castle this morning, she told her. I'll find you after my special training. Remember, Gabrielle? The little girl nodded without much expression. A flicker of guilt crossed Fleur's face. She hugged her sister tighter, as if the squeeze could give both of them some comfort. Nearby, a small group of striking students came down from the back of the hall with trays and sat at a place already reserved at the Gryffindor table, herbology textbooks and notebooks spread beside them. I didn't expect classes to keep going as usual during the tournament, one of them muttered. How are we supposed to support our champions if they're in class? Another complained. Why aren't the other schools' students in classes? Loren kept repeating variations of the question as they sat. The champions from the other schools are being trained full-time. Our champions still have to attend lessons and do homework. How are we supposed to win? Don't you agree, Harry? Don't make fun of me, Harry said, forcing a smile as he listlessly poked at his bread. A group of older girls walked by. Angelina casually handed him a piece of chocolate and called out cheerfully, Eat up, champion. Even if it isn't me, it'll be someone from Gryffindor. Katie Bell looped an arm around his shoulder. Show the other schools what we can do, and give Cedric Diggory a good hiding while you're at it. Ron looked green with envy. Honestly, mate, I'd swap with you in a heartbeat, even if it meant facing Voldemort. Their teasing eased Harry's tense nerves a little. He'd stumbled back to the common room after champion training last night, been dragged into a celebration, and only had a few hours to talk with his friends before it was half the night. They'd reached a grim conclusion. Whoever had entered his name in the tournament was almost certainly a Death Eater. The coincidence of Voldemort's name appearing among the champions suggested a direct threat. Either Harry was intended as some sacrifice to restore Voldemort, or he was meant to be killed outright. But there was one small relief. If Voldemort was to act at the tournament, He'd have to do it where the school was prepared and the professors could intervene. Dumbledore and his colleagues could work to keep Harry safe. Harry sorted the fragments in his head and glanced at Hermione. She'd been hesitant to speak the night before, as if she were holding something back. "Stop joking, you two," she snapped, spreading mayonnaise on her bread. "Let's be serious. According to what Harry said last night, the first task is on November 24th, Hermione went on. It's about courage, and the champions won't be allowed help. Their only weapon is their wand." "That sounds like a fight," Ron said, eyebrows raised. "Can it be worse than a basilisk?" Hermione's mouth opened to reply, but Loren slid a fried egg onto her slice of bread and said, "Relax, there's no use fretting now. We have almost a month." "Not a month," Hermione corrected sharply. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Right. Loren folded his bread into a sandwich to keep her from running on. The banners and ribbons fluttered, the hall noisy with voices that blended into the general roar. New students glanced at Harry from time to time, startled and curious, and were gently put in their place by older ones. "That's Harry Potter," they were told. "He's been different since he was a baby. Don't be surprised." The older students' tales, Quirrell and the Dark Arts, Lockhart and Memory Charms, the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk, Sirius Black's escape, were retold between mouthfuls of greasy fried eggs until the newcomers accepted them as part of school life. After breakfast, the school headed out for herbology in the third greenhouse. Bubotuber lesson was over. The first years were half disappointed that there was nothing left to pop. The next class was care of magical creatures, which, today, seemed to need more care than its creatures. "Let go! Damn it! Let go of me!" Pansy Parkinson screamed as a blast-ended scroot clung to her hand, sparks shooting out from it. The Slytherins scattered until Hagrid rushed over and calmed the situation. Loren, squatting on the grass, poked at a developed scroot with a small stick. Unlike the scaly juveniles he'd seen before, these had grown a grayish-white, shiny carapace, armor that deflected simple charms and resisted fire-based spells. The tail stinger had already formed. Hagrid still called them adorably cute. Ron muttered that perhaps after getting stung a few times, Hagrid would stop thinking that. Hermione crouched a little away, making careful notes on blast-ended scroot behavior and looking both fascinated and disgusted. A cheer went up behind her when some boys, Harry and Ron among them, threw a scroot into the air. It discharged a string of foul-smelling sparks over them, and the boys cheered. Hermione turned back to her notes, feeling conflicted. She glanced at Loren, whose brow was furrowed in concentration. "Hermione, I found something," he said without looking up. "The juveniles have stripes on their bodies. I thought those were where the carapace begins, but observation suggests something else." She flipped her notebook open to a sketch he'd made. "Anything special?" "Look." Loren drew twisted patterns in the grass with the stick, patterns very like the juvenile scroot stripes. Hermione's eyes widened. She'd studied ancient runes. The patterns looked familiar. "Runes," she whispered. "Runes symbolizing explosive fire," Loren said. "Flamel once told me that runes evolved from natural phenomena and magical creatures, but I've never seen something so direct." Hermione leaned closer, intrigued despite herself, and used the stick to prod the scroot under Loren's guidance when a soft, delicate voice spoke up. For example, Vila. The girls looked up. A small golden-haired, blue-eyed girl grinned at them. Her eyelashes fluttered beneath the brim of a light blue hat. She looked as innocent as an angel. "You are," Hermione began, spotting the pale blue silk of a Beauxbaton's uniform under the girl's coat. "A Beauxbaton student?" Loren blinked and recognized the face. "You're Fleur Delacour's sister, Gabrielle, right?" Gabrielle's bright eyes blinked. "I remember you from the champion selection feast. You were one of the youngest. Why are you here?" Loren asked. "My headmistress is training with my sister and told me to stay by myself," Gabrielle said, voice soft and halting. Short sentences came easily. Long ones stumbled with an awkward accent. "It's too stuffy in the castle, so I wanted fresh air." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "Every floor of Hogwarts is airy enough, and you can open windows in classrooms. How can it be stuffy?" Loren pinched the brim of the girl's hat and asked, perhaps bluntly, "Among your schoolmates, do you only talk to your sister?" Gabrielle looked down at the scroot, hiding her face a little beneath the hat. "I'm not in the same year as the others," she said, And some people aren't comfortable that my sister was chosen as champion. Loren exchanged a look with Ron. Right, he said finally to himself. Then he called back toward the castle. Ron, I need you. A few minutes later, Ron, who'd heard the story, squatted beside them. He studied the little girl's wounded expression and had to fight his instinct to ask, "What's it to me?" He shoved that aside and, after a pause, said, "You two clever people can't figure it out. What do you want me to do?" Loren and Ron stared at each other for a long beat. "Have Ginny play with her," Loren said. "Third years have fewer classes now." "Third years just started electives. How do they have fewer classes?" Ron frowned. "Fewer than we do," Loren replied. "But what's that got to do with me?" Ron started, then looked at Gabrielle's blinking, pitiful eyes and sighed. "All right, I'll talk to Ginny at lunch." At lunchtime, the great hall buzzed as usual. Students from other schools still drew glances, some curious, some skeptical, about the fairness of Harry's selection as champion. The 4 school heads and the ministry officials who had attended the selection feast hadn't appeared at the high table since. Fleur, Crumb, and Mistra Graves had reportedly gone to secret training with their heads of school. Only Hogwarts champions were still in classes, as if they'd been left to fend for themselves. Loren kept glancing at the Slytherin table where a cluster of Durmstrang students sat looking dazed, staring blankly at their plates. "What's wrong with the Durmstrang lot?" he asked Seamus. "You wouldn't believe it," Seamus said. "Students from the other schools are being slotted into 7th-year classes for now. Durmstrang took the Slytherin timetable, Bobottons picked Ravenclaws, and Ilvermorny split between Hufflepuff and Gryffindor." "So the Durmstrang lot had potions and got zombified by Snape?" Harry asked. "Better," Seamus said, laughing. "They had Moody's defense class. He put them through Imperio practice and showed them their principal's darker past. Most of them came out half-stunned." The others exchanged sympathetic looks. Soon Ron burst back, looking pleased with himself. "Loren, you're a star," he crowed, squeezing past Harry and slinging an arm around Loren's shoulder. "My perfect mate, closer than my brothers." He grinned from ear to ear and helped himself to food, utterly delighted. Hermione and Harry exchanged a look and raised eyebrows at Loren, who buried his face in his plate. Let it be, he told himself. Nicholas Flamel had told him to keep an eye on the Beauxbaton champion's sister before he left. If watching Gabrielle meant a little embarrassment, then it was a small price to pay. 463. Who doesn't want to see a fire dragon? Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the Triwizard selection feast. Harry, who'd always preferred to keep a low profile, had assumed the fuss would die down, but he had underestimated Hogwarts gossip. In a school run on closed management, anything worth talking about was chewed over and re-chewed until everyone knew every variation. Lunchtime, dormitory whispers before lights out, new theories and obsessions. Which champion was strongest? Who had the better marks? Who was the tallest? Who was the prettiest? Word that the champions would be photographed for promotional material that weekend set the rumor mill ablaze and shoved the 4 male champions into the spotlight. Wherever they went, pairs of eyes followed them. Harry felt the staring especially. He was a head shorter than Cedric, Graves, and Crumb, and it stung. The few who were close to Harry didn't want to be on display either, so most afternoons they slipped out of the castle and spent time by the Black Lake, which hadn't frozen yet. A carp slapped its tail, sending up a scatter of water. Neville, splashed full in the face, only laughed. He had his pant legs and sleeves rolled up so high they were ridiculous and was squatting to peer into the shallows. "What are you looking for, Neville?" Harry asked, sitting on the shore. "A kind of aquatic alga," Neville said. "It's supposed to let you breathe underwater. I don't know if the Black Lake has any." "Did that come from one of Moody's books again?" Ron asked, moving a knight on the chessboard between them. "Yes." Not far to their right, under a wide, canopy-like tree, Hermione had her herbology textbook open and was reading softly, pulling them all into the afternoon. Bouncing bulbs are different from boobatubers. They prefer a drier environment. The transplanting process requires careful control of humidity and temperature, and you must watch their tendencies to avoid being struck by bouncing attacks. "Why aren't you reading the attack cases?" Loren complained, lying nearby and poking Hermione. Bright specks of light filtered through the leaves and hit his outstretched arm as he shaded his eyes with the other. Those attack reports are interesting. Every year some poor soul gets smacked around by bouncing bulbs. Hermione blinked and skipped ahead. For stem herbs, compost and soil require control over moisture and fermentation time. Loren made a few muffled grumbles and then fell silent. Hermione read seriously now, her herbology knowledge from the last 2 months quietly settling into place. Harry and Ron continued their wizard chess. Ron liked to prolong the game, capturing pieces one by one before delivering the final checkmate, and Harry liked to look for any chance to break the stalemate. A splash cut through the lazy conversation. Neville had stepped on a patch of moss, slipped, and gone down into the water. "Are you all right?" Ron called. Harry jumped up so quickly that his knee clipped the chessboard. Pieces clattered everywhere, turning the familiar wooden battleground into a jumbled mess. He charged forward to haul Neville out, while Ron watched, more than a little put out by the ruined game. Together they helped Neville ashore, used a quick whirlwind sweep to dry him, and gathered tinder, dry twigs and dead leaves, to get a small bonfire going. Loren sat up and leaned against the tree, watching with interest until Hermione tugged his sleeve, and he closed his smile. "Someone's coming," he said. 3 girls approached arm in arm, their light footsteps crackling through the leaf litter. "Good afternoon, Harry, Loren, Hermione," they chimed. "Good afternoon, Luna, Ginny." "Gabrielle?" Harry replied. "Is there something you need?" Hermione asked. Gabrielle glanced down at their little bonfire, the flames reflected in her eyes. Ginny's look never left Harry, and Luna, soft, otherworldly, said, "Fred and I have made up." Harry blinked. Loren, catching the blank on Harry's face, supplied, "Fred is a unicorn. He and Luna had a disagreement after that basilisk thing." "Oh." Harry remembered Hagrid mentioning a ministry inspection of the Forbidden Forest last month to check things for the tournament. Luna went on in that same dreamlike tone. "Fred says a group of large creatures came into the Forbidden Forest and kept them awake all night. He told me not to tell anyone, but I thought you should know, Harry." "Large creatures?" Harry's eyes widened. "Could this be part of the Triwizard tasks?" "Fred told me to keep it secret," Luna added quietly. Harry looked at her, partly alarmed, partly frustrated. If Luna's unicorn friend had been explicitly told to keep silent, why had she said anything at all? Ginny exchanged a look with Luna, thoughtful and cautious. They all sat around the bonfire and talked through what they knew about the Forbidden Forest and the tournament. "I couldn't get any more out of her," Harry said. "If she was meant to keep quiet, why tell me part of it?" Hermione folded her hands and thought through it. "Think about how Luna said it, Harry. If she's breaking a confidence to warn you, then whatever's in the Forbidden Forest must be dangerous. She wouldn't have done that lightly." Ron's eyes lit up. "So we should go and find out. Tonight!" Harry's heart thudded. He glanced at the castle, then around at his friends. "But isn't that cheating? I mean, it doesn't feel fair." Loren watched the little flames and let them do the talking. Dragons in the forest being moved into place, Charlie and the other keepers around, Hagrid was bound to be busy and on edge. Getting there early to see what was going on wasn't necessarily cheating. It could be self-protection. He looked up, his voice even. "Think about how your name got into the cup, Harry. What's more important, some abstract idea of fairness or your life?" Harry's face hardened. "You're right. I'm not doing this to get an advantage. I'm doing it to protect myself." "Then it's decided," Loren said. "We'll go into the Forbidden Forest tonight. Bring your invisibility cloak, Harry." "I will." "We'll meet half an hour after lights out. Filch patrols outside the Slytherin common room then." "Should we tell Hagrid?" Neville blurted, his voice tight. "Send him a note with Hedwig," someone suggested. "He'll understand." Neville hugged himself and began to tremble, the thought of treading into the Forbidden Forest setting his nerves alight. Around the bonfire, the plan took shape with surprising ease. Cloak, time, rote, and a message for Hagrid. And the friends sat there while the lake breathed quietly beside them, wondering what kind of creatures had kept unicorns awake all night. The deep blue night sky lay over the land, and the Forbidden Forest was anything but still. From deep within came the occasional tremor. Small animals shifted in tree hollows and huddled on branches, uneasy. The sky was dim, and only the little hut at the forest's edge showed a faint goose-yellow candlelight through its windows. Knock, knock, knock. The door groaned as it opened. Voices drifted in from the edge of the trees, and the atmosphere at last stirred. Hagrid poked his head out. His beard and hair looked as if they'd been ruffled by a storm, and he seemed more frazzled than usual. He glanced around nervously, then opened the door fully. "In quick, children, don't let the patrols see you." Loren, Hermione, Harry, and Ron slipped inside and sat by the fire. Fang lay curled beside the settee, eyes half closed. Sensing familiar smells, he weakly wagged his tail. Loren stroked him, and he relaxed a little. Harry felt a prick of apprehension. "Hagrid, what exactly is in the Forbidden Forest? It's so secret. It must be some huge creature, right? What is it?" "Shh, Harry." Hagrid closed the door gently, sank into the chair opposite them, and let his brows fall into a troubled frown. He looked torn. "Blimey, you're giving me a hard time. I promised to keep it secret. Madame Maxime asked me, and I agreed in my capacity as a professor of care of magical creatures." "You were there the night of the champion's selection," Loren said quietly. "You know Harry's name shouldn't have been in the Triwizard Tournament. You know what some people are up to." Hagrid's large face tightened, and his fists went white at the knuckles. "It's got to be Karkaroff, the old Death Eater. He shouldn't have been let off back then." Harry and Ron stared. Hermione looked surprised, too. They'd thought Moody had been exaggerating Karkaroff's past. Hagrid sighed. "I wasn't supposed to tell you, but Loren's right. Someone's out to get you, Harry. Wants you dead. We can't just sit here." Harry swallowed. "Tell me, what is it? You'll see for yourselves. Did you bring the invisibility cloak?" Harry produced the silver cloth, and Hagrid relaxed a little. "Put it on, quickly. Let's go." Harry and Ron slipped under the cloak until they vanished. Loren and Hermione exchanged quick looks and cast disillusionment charms, their forms folded into the shadows. Hagrid's eye twitched. He thought their movements a little too practiced. Fang whined, opened his eyes, and tried to get up. "Fang, don't. Stay and guard the hut." "Woof," Fang said. "Don't worry, we'll be back soon." They stepped out into the dark. Hagrid hesitated toward the paddock, where Beauxbaton's ornate carriage and several winged horses were tethered, then turned and plunged into the forest. If anyone had seen them, it would have been strange. Only one tall figure moving through the trees, but the sound of many pair of feet rustled, as if a group were present. They walked a long way until the castle and the lake were no longer visible. Strange noises grew sharper, closer, voices shouting, then a shrill, roaring cry. Under the cloak, Harry felt his face go pale. Rounding a thicket, Hagrid halted. Leaves stirred as if by an invisible wind, and the group caught a few quick, tense breaths. Ahead, a vast clearing lay open. Tall paddocks formed of magically reinforced wooden planks enclosed 6 massive dragons lying on the ground. Each breath sent out sprays of orange, crimson, or eerie blue flame that bloomed like flowers. The dragons' muscular bodies writhed beneath shield-like scales. Loren watched the brilliant colors, his hands sore from Hermione's tight grip. Wizards in fireproof cloth were fastening black iron chains to the dragons' legs and necks. 2 wizards could barely drag a single chain. The dragons shifted and turned their heads with barely affected movements. "Hagrid, you're here?" A broad, dark-skinned face freckled across the clearing. Charlie stepped toward them. "Could use your help. These chains are too heavy. We can't lift them properly." Of course it was Charlie. Loren and the others breathed easier. Hagrid frowned at the dragons. "Do they have to be chained?" "They're mother dragons brooding eggs," Charlie said. "They're irritable. The castle's just next door. We've got to be careful. Student safety, and the creature's safety, too." Hagrid stared at them with a mix of awe and worry. "What exactly are they? Tell me about them." Charlie blinked. Hagrid wouldn't recognize dragons? When he'd been a pupil, he'd wanted to raise dragons himself. He'd even kept a Norwegian ridgeback for a time. "All right, the one closest to us is a Swedish short snout. Don't be fooled by how it looks. Its fire's among the strongest." The short snout was medium-sized, its scales a silver blue and deceptively calm. Keepers on ladders hauled chains toward its neck. Suddenly, it breathed a dazzling blue flame from its nostrils. The keepers dropped ladders and chains. The fire turned wood to ash and molten the iron into red, dripping metal. Under the invisibility cloak, Harry felt his stomach drop. Charlie grinned grimly. Next is the Hungarian horntail. If you get that one, you're in for a rough time. The horntail was black with bronze horns and yellow eyes. Its tail was longer than its body and lashed like a whip, spikes shattering iron posts. Charms and spells struck sparks off its flanks. Its black scales remained unmarked. Then there were the other species. The Chinese fireball with scarlet scales and a mane of golden tassels. The Peruvian viper tooth, about 15 feet long with brass scales and venomous fangs. The Hebridean black, native and rough-scaled with a bat-like wing and a barbed tail. Only the Welsh green seemed docile enough to accept chains, even while tearing at a cow nearby. 6 in total, Hagrid murmured, fascinated. 1 for each champion. There's an extra? The Ministry wanted a spare, Charlie said. I don't know what they'll make the champions do. Probably something to get past the dragons, not kill them. These are brooding mothers. They'll be at their worst. I just hope we can help if anything goes wrong. How's Harry doing with all this? Oh, Harry's fine, Hagrid said, flustered. I just hope he stays safe, especially in the first task. I don't even want to tell Mum what he might face. Harry felt weak-kneed. He wanted to run to the castle and tell Dumbledore he was withdrawing from the tournament. On the path back to the castle, the others chattered animatedly, pointing out features of the dragons. Harry barely heard them. His future had narrowed to a dim, threatening corridor with no light. How do you feel? Loren asked quietly. I'm fine, Harry lied, forcing a small smile. Good thing we came tonight. If I'd seen a dragon for the first time on the day of the competition, I might have fainted in front of the whole school. He stared down at his wand, a thin stick against dragons dozens of feet long, armored and breathing fire. Ron tried to console him. You fought a basilisk before, Harry. You can handle this. Yes, but that basilisk didn't breathe fire at me from 20 feet away. Harry sighed. How am I going to persuade Dumbledore to lend me the Gryffindor sword anyway? Don't even think about hacking a dragon with the sword, Loren said with a quiet laugh. The Ministry wouldn't let it. These dragons are valuable and needed for breeding. Thanks, Loren. That's very comforting. Hermione smiled and patted his hand. Relax, Harry. The tournament organizers aren't trying to make anyone dragon food. They won't make you face one head-on. Charlie and Dumbledore will be watching. Loren looked toward the castle, its few lit windows like distant beacons. Still, you need to get over your fear of dragons. You mean? Harry glanced at him. You mean that mirror? 15 minutes later in the Gryffindor common room, the place was dark, except for a single dim candle on the round table by the window. The 4 of them sat as usual. Loren leaned back on cushions while Hermione watched the candle, and then the room with a slightly amused expression. Harry toyed with the flower-shaped mirror in his hand and then turned to Ron, who kept avoiding his gaze. So you think this mirror will let me dream of a dragon and face it in the dream, right, Loren? Not a real dragon. Your dream will construct a dragon-like monster, Loren said. Is there a difference? A little. I don't fully understand dragon physiology or their magic, so what you'll face is a huge creature with hard scales and armor. I've also adjusted the flames. Harry nodded, as if that made sense. So should I go to bed now? Not exactly. Loren sat up, opened the window, and smiled faintly. Hasn't anyone noticed? Everything in the common room is reversed, Harry. You've been holding the mirror with your left hand. As if a trapdoor opened, a sudden gust of air poured in. Under that pressure, Harry felt a strong tug. The wind caught his clothes and limbs and pulled him through the window. Ah, he cried. A dizzy feeling, then the castle dwindled into a dot. They fell through air, the forbidden forest rushing up to meet them. Harry hit soft earth and looked up into the yellow eyes of the Swedish short snout. He swallowed. The dragon inhaled, its neck swelling, and then a terrifying roar cut the air. This time, the short snout's flame was not blue, but a thick orange-yellow, edged in almost black. It lunged. The next morning at breakfast, the castle had laid out an assortment of condiments for the visiting schools. To Loren, the strange sauces were just interesting combinations. He started to tinker cheerfully, mixing mayo, peanut butter, and melted cheese into a paste that surprisingly tasted like sesame. Harry sat opposite, staring and mechanically chewing nut bread, the light gone from his face. Harry, what's wrong? Ron asked softly. Harry's grievance welled up. I dreamt last night, faced a Swedish short snout. I raised a Transfiguration steel shield to block the flames. I thought even if the shield melted a little, it would buy me time, but the steel caught fire. The shield burned. Everything in front of me caught fire. The flames turned into dragons and chased me. The world in the mirror shattered. I didn't sleep a wink. Loren looked genuinely apologetic. I wanted the short snout to be impressive. I'm sorry, the others won't be like that. Hermione dabbed a piece of bread in Loren's experimental sauce and made an odd face. You should pay attention to Hagrid. They turned and saw Hagrid at the staff table. He was wearing a suit several sizes too small, with a fresh flower pinned to his chest, looking like an enormous, excited artichoke. He was sitting next to Madame Maxime and frequently blushed when he spoke to her. Seeing him in that outfit made their expressions complicated. Loren hesitated. At least size-wise, they're a match. Harry and Ron nodded. Hermione pushed Loren's sauce away. I don't mean that. If Madame Maxime accepts Hagrid's invitation to dinner and says she'd like to see the enclosures, Hagrid will show her the dragons. Harry's eyes sharpened. Then Beauxbatons Delacour would find out about the dragons very quickly. Hermione lowered her voice. With the forest's protection, it might have stayed private, but if Karkaroff or Principal Fontana want to know, they'll find out fast. Harry forced the last bite down and watched Cedric at the Hufflepuff table stand up and say goodbyes with a friendly smile. The gears in Harry's head started turning. He silently began to make a plan. 465. How to Deal with a Fire Dragon Sunday, November 20th. November was already more than halfway through, and the air had turned cold. Fine snow had fallen the night before. From the Gryffindor common room, the nearer hills were dusted white. Hermione was absorbed in the latest Daily Prophet. Loren hunched over his desk, working on his divination homework while Crookshanks lay across the table, tilting his head and watching the quill tip leave ink on the page. As if you can understand that, Loren muttered, dipping his quill and pressing his hand on the ginger hand warmer, kneading it to bring back warmth. Professor Trelawney's divination assignment was long and tedious. If he did it by the book the way it was taught, it would take forever and probably earn poor marks. Only by inventing melodramatic misfortunes could he get an O. He had hoped to borrow a case file for inspiration, but a certain bad-tempered witch had ratted him out, and he'd been blacklisted from the hospital wing ever since. Professor Granger was insufferable. Loren sighed and wrote the last line on his paper. After Christmas, my tongue and oral mucosa will develop sores from trying strange new foods. Hermione laughed beside him. You could invent your own symptoms, even without the case file. Loren glanced at her with a mock glare. Hermione sobered and spread the prophet in front of him. Look, champions' photos and reports are out. The front page showed a group photo of the 5 champions. Fleur Delacour sat elegantly in a chair, her cheek slightly flushed. Victor Krum stood behind in a heavy coat. Pickery Greaves clutched his tie with a determined look. Cedric Diggory smiled gently. Harry stood among the boys, a head shorter than the others. On the inside page, however, Harry's solo photo got a separate spread, hands on hips, grinning foolishly, looking a little vacant. Loren stared at it a moment, then turned back to Hermione. Can't he at least get a haircut? It does him no favors. He has spots on his forehead. He needs to cover them up, Hermione said reflexively, then rolled her eyes. Never mind that. Read this. Loren skimmed the article instead of the usual introductions to the Triwizard Tournament. A headline caught his eye. Boy Tragedy, Harry Potter and the Triwizard Tournament. Harry Potter 12, a suspicious contestant. Ghostly memories wander in his eyes. He holds back tears when asked about his past. The prophet filled page after page with Harry's history, his feud with you-know-who, connecting the Quidditch World Cup disturbances to the tournament, implying Death Eaters were lurking, and Harry was in grave danger. Rita Skeeter's return from New York had made her prose sharper than ever, never naming Voldemort outright, but hinting at him on every line. It read like a serialized melodrama. Loren snorted. Dumbledore must be thrilled to see this. Mrs. Weasley must be beside herself, Hermione said, folding the paper away. Come on, let's find Harry and Ron in the library. Loren shoved his chair in, gave Hermione a playful punch on the triceps. It's your fault. If you hadn't stopped me borrowing that case file, I'd have finished my divination homework before Harry and Ron. Hermione flushed and offered no reply. The library was quiet for a weekend. Besides Hogwarts students, there were the visiting teams. Ilvermorny students clustered over Hogwarts history. A handful of Durmstrang students hovered near the restricted section, watched sternly by Madame Pince. A smattering of Beauxbaton's pupils wandered casually. Loren and Hermione went straight to their usual table by the window. Ron was already there, surrounded by a mountain of dragon books, riffling through them like he was searching for a needle in a haystack. Clipping claws with magic, treatment for scale rot, useless unless you're an eccentric like Hagrid who likes his dragons healthy, Ron muttered, folding useful pages and tossing aside another titled People Who Pamper Dragons. He brightened when they arrived. Finally, come see what might help with the dragon. He pushed a stack of thick, dog-eared volumes toward them. I don't know what Harry's doing. He actually slipped off with Cedric. Does he think I'm the one who'll have to deal with the dragon? Honestly. Loren and Hermione sat opposite him. Hermione began flipping through books, Loren more leisurely. I thought you'd be jealous when Harry got picked, Loren said to Ron. You'd sulk. Stop talking to him. I did at first, Ron admitted, scratching his cheek. But then, it's hard to explain. I figured it out. I thought you two would fall out. How could I? I'm not an idiot. Oh, so you're not. You, Hermione, aren't you going to say something? Hermione kept reading. Time went by with the rustle of pages. By the time Loren finished skimming basic charms for hyperactive and irritable animals, Harry burst in, breathless. Phew, ha, you won't believe who I bumped into. He flopped into a chair beside Ron and recounted his covert tailing of Cedric. After shadowing him for 2 floors, he'd waited for the right moment, cast a precise diffindo, slit Cedric's new satchel, and while Cedric was busy picking up his scattered books and quills, Harry moved in and told him about the dragon. Loren and Hermione exchanged looks. Revenge, plain and simple. You should have seen it, Harry said, grinning. Cedric just froze. He even tried to put the ink bottle back in like nothing happened. Ron's expression went odd. Then I bumped into Professor Moody. Harry lowered his voice theatrically. He told me the first task is a dragon. He said, use your strengths. If I can summon my firebolt, I could get it into the arena. He looked at them eagerly. What do you think? None of us are your level on a broom, Harry, Loren said. What matters is, can you actually fight a dragon while riding the firebolt? He slid a heavy tome toward Harry. If you're not sure, read these. Harry glanced at basic charms for hyperactive and irritable animals. Quick hair removal, dragons don't have hair. Sneezing charm, that'd probably make the dragon breathe harder. Tongue hardening, now that'd be useful. He shut the book and asked, Loren, what would you do? I'd talk to it. Harry blinked. You can speak dragon? No, Loren said, but animals tend to listen to me. Harry thought of snakes. Listen, Hermione said, passing him a neat stack of books. You've faced your fears already. There are many ways to handle a dragon, clever transfiguration, trick charms. If you're unsure, pick the one you trust most. Harry rubbed his face and brightened. I'll practice in the mirror tonight. Loren, can you make me ride my firebolt in my dreams? No problem, Loren laughed. And Madame Pince's scolding suddenly echoed through the library. Some girls had slipped in, one with a Bulgaria scarf tied about her waist, shrieking and whispering. Hermione sorely recognized the offender and scowled. Oh no, not him again. Why won't he just read on his big ridiculous ship? Victor Crumb emerged from behind a shelf looking tired, carrying books, and sat in a corner. Hermione grimaced and tugged Loren's hand. Come on, take me to Professor Burbage's office. Harry and Ron exchanged shrugged, puzzled. As they walked, Hermione complained. Doesn't he know how many fans he has? And he still comes to the library. She gripped Loren's hand, and they climbed the stairwell together. Loren slipped his fingers through hers and squeezed. I don't think I've seen you dislike someone so much. Is there something I don't know? I keep running into him, Hermione said. Tuesday, in ancient runes. Wednesday on my way to Burbage's. He's always with a gaggle of fangirls. It's infuriating. Her eyes shone with annoyance, but Loren noticed how grown up her features had become, the old habit of crying long left behind. They left her at Professor Burbage's door. Loren gave the Muggle Studies professor a brief greeting. She was patient and kind, and then headed down the marble stair to the hall. He planned to go to the Forbidden Forest and see the Swedish short snout again, thinking about its flames. Rounding a corner, he almost collided with someone approaching. Professor Snape, his hair flecked with white, wrapped in deep green robes with a winter cape of satin and velvet. Loren grinned. "Good morning, Professor Snape. Nice new cape." Snape shrugged it off with no expression, snowflakes melting on its velvet edge and splattering onto Loren. "Your potions work has become increasingly slipshod over the past months," Snape said, his voice cold. "Is it because you've been missing weekend lessons?" Loren swallowed. "Sorry, Professor. I'll work harder." "Do not waste your time," Snape said quietly, his gaze intense. "Many spend their lives stirring spoons and adding ingredients without thought. They are servants of potions. Only a few have talent." Loren listened. Snape continued. "You've read powerful potions. Try brewing some of the advanced ones in that book. Keep a record, your experiences and observations in the process, and submit it to me." Loren glanced at the professor. "About ingredients." "You will procure them yourself," Snape cut in, then added after a pause. "Keep your distance, Morgan. Don't let too many people know of our connection." Loren frowned. Something in Snape's manner felt off. With Karkaroff and the imposter Moody here, Snape's cautionation seemed more pointed than usual. Snape lowered his voice. "You've noticed, I think. Dumbledore is letting too many outsiders into the castle. Some of them do not behave as they should." 466, Game Start Divination class, was finally over. Stepping out of the stuffy, incense-scented room, the sharp, cold air made Loren sneeze. Ron followed behind Harry with his hands on Harry's shoulders. His eyelids were half shut, as if he were fighting to keep them open but losing the battle. Harry's own eyes were bloodshot, not from last night's dragon dream, but from the ordeal of divination. He was fairly certain Professor Trelawney had some kind of inner eye, and it seemed to find him especially. Loren and Ron could sleep easily, but the moment Harry closed his eyes, Trelawney would fix him with her gaze. Cold air outside, a warm classroom, tired but unable to sleep. What crueler torture could there be? To stay awake, Harry spent the lesson reviewing his recent dream training notes, copying down every useful charm and tactic. He read over the dense parchment in his hand as memories of the week's sessions replayed. The first night's encounter had been unpleasant. The irrational flames still made him flinch at the sight of the Swedish short snout. But as Loren adjusted the images, the other dragons grew clearer. The sheen of their scales, the pattern of their muscles. He felt his fear of dragons easing. He could stand in front of them longer, and after Professor Moody's advice, he'd begun using his firebolt to maneuver. He still couldn't defeat a dragon in his dreams, but what was the difference between a dragon that could only kick up dust behind him and a blind basilisk? He only wished he knew how far the other champions had progressed. "Loren." Harry passed him the parchment. "I've got some ideas for dealing with dragons and plans tailored to different types. The Hebridean black is big but slow. I can kite it on my firebolt. The Welsh green tends to be docile. You can get past it without bothering it." Loren took the parchment and squinted at the cramped handwriting. It was a page of scribbles, only a word or two readable at first, and his head throbbed a little. "So far, I can't think of a surefire way to beat one," Harry continued. "Last Friday, I stunned a Welsh green with a stupefy, but I don't know if it was actually knocked out or just wanted a nap." Loren thought that level would probably be enough to get through the task, but he still peered carefully, picking out a few charms he recognized from library research. He hesitated. "This blinding charm you've been working on, have you mastered it yet?" "Not entirely." Harry forced a small, awkward smile. "It feels harder than Expelliarmus. I can't fully channel it, but I should be able to learn it before the tournament." "That charm is powerful," Loren said slowly. "It can affect dragons, yes, but some books classify it as dark arts. It can injure a dragon's eyes severely. Healing might take months. You should be careful whether you use it." Harry nodded, thoughtful. Winter had come to the castle in earnest. The air around Hogwarts had turned cold, and everyone had switched to winter robes. Thick sweaters and fluffy scarves made the students look soft and rounded. The chubbier ones waddled like the geese by the lake. It was already getting dark, but there was still time before dinner. Loren and Hermione had agreed to meet in the library, and after turning a stair and a corner, he spotted her familiar figure. Hermione wore a new winter robe with plain black trousers. Her brown hair slipped softly over her shoulders. The padded sweater made her look a bit bulkier, and her cheeks had filled out for winter, slightly flushed, apple-like, irresistibly pinchable. Loren's gaze was blunt. His thoughts were written on his face. Hermione caught him watching and warned, "Mr. Morgan, your thoughts are dangerous." What harm could a kind Morgan mean? I only want to help Miss Granger massage her facial muscles. People don't usually massage their facial muscles, do they? Why not? Loren said righteously. Toning facial muscles reduces wrinkles and slows aging. Hermione stared at him for a beat, and when she couldn't find words, stepped sideways. Come on to the library. If we're late, someone will have already borrowed the potions book you want. Changing the subject because you can't argue. Sk. Loren reached out and poked her cheek once more, satisfied. Don't worry, the book's obscure. No one's after it. Hermione filed that away silently. You've suddenly started studying potions again. Is Professor Snape tutoring you? Tutoring will probably be next term, Loren said. What do you mean? He warned that there are ill-intentioned people inside the castle, and we should keep our connections quiet. Hermione didn't immediately jump to conclusions, but a few names came to mind. Professor Moody? Headmaster Karkaroff? Possibly, Loren said, his voice dropping. But that alone wouldn't make Snape so cautious. I've always suspected Crouch was dodgy, but his problems may be bigger than I imagined. Mr. Crouch is problematic? Loren poked her cheek again. I can't prove it yet, but Dumbledore must know something. There's conspiracy afoot. Let's try to be careful this year. Hermione's lashes lowered. His words had clarified a lot. No wonder both the Ministry and Dumbledore had allowed Harry to compete. One side wanted to harm Harry, and the other wanted to draw out who was plotting. It all fit together in a cold puzzle. A prickle spread over Hermione's cheeks. Coming back to herself, she found Loren still staring, brazen as ever. Massage! Ah! Facial massage, he said. Loren Morgan. Hermione's face was suddenly expressionless. A scarcely contained force flared from her small frame. In the little pavilion in the castle courtyard, Gabrielle Delacour sat on a low stool in a pale blue velvet cloak, watching the bluebell blue flames burning in a glass jar. Her delicate face shone with curiosity. She pressed her palm to the outside of the glass, and the warmth made her eyes glitter. Ginny, Luna, Harry, and Ron sat nearby in the thick sweaters Mrs. Weasley had made, feeling a bit sorry for the girl. Gabrielle was young and foreign. Most of the Beauxbaton students arrived with silks and travel cloaks, unsuited to Scotland's cold. The thick velvet cloak had been specially requested by her sister. Harry sent a few blue flames floating through the air with a flick of his wand, then asked, Gabrielle, the first task is this afternoon. Your sister has been secretly training with Madame Maxime. Do you know how it's going? Secret. Training. Gabrielle's reply was halting. Long sentences in a foreign language were still difficult for her. Ginny stood close and gently squeezed the little girl's hand. Lately, Ginny had noticed that Gabrielle understood what she wanted well, but stumbled over what she didn't want. Clever in some ways, still learning in others. Harry nodded. It's dangerous. The champion must get an egg from beneath a dragon. I'm worried about Fleur. I'd hate for such a pretty girl to get hurt. Ginny's face tightened. She took Gabrielle's hand and said, We shouldn't stay out too long. The cloak isn't warm enough. Let's go back inside. Harry watched them walk away with an odd, longing feeling. November 24th. Cold tightened its grip. At lunch, the great hall was warm and festive. The Ilvermorny students were explaining the history of Thanksgiving to friends they'd made. Even distant heads and champions who hadn't appeared in public for a while were present, and the hall hummed with a cozy peace. Loren sat at the Gryffindor table, hastily swallowing a piece of steak, and asked Hermione, Why does their way of giving thanks mean stealing land from others and slaughtering the locals, and then they make a whole festival about it? Hermione froze, confused. Around them, students glanced in surprise. The Ilvermorny pupils began earnestly to explain what Thanksgiving meant, but Loren's sharp question lingered. The atmosphere, warm as it was, took on a slight edge, until Professor McGonagall tapped a silver spoon against a goblet and commanded attention. Quiet, please, she said. The The first task of the Triwizard Tournament will be held this afternoon. We have erected stands on the hill beside the Forbidden Forest. Students wishing to watch should line up after 2 o'clock to enter. Harry's fork clattered into his plate. He had known the task was today since morning, but the news still felt sudden. The hours that had passed seemed to evaporate. McGonagall continued, "Champions, please come to me after lunch. You must enter early for wands to be checked and for the drawing of lots." The hall erupted with chatter. Conversations shifted from Thanksgiving to the champions. Some admired Fleur's looks, others noted Crumb's athletic build, and some whispered about tricks Graves had shown in charms. Most talk, though, circled Cedric and Harry. Cedric, who had a knack for clever things. Harry, remembered for the troll and the basilisk, both prodigies in their ways. The champions smiled politely as people approached. Fleur Delacour looked pale and off balance. Victor Krum seemed moodier than usual. Pickly Greaves fussed with his golden tie. Cedric offered strained smiles, as though he'd forgotten how to be relaxed. Harry found he could barely eat. The roast before him looked like a dragon's bite out of a thigh. No wonder Loren disliked that sort of steak. Despite the dream practice, the eve of the real event made Harry restless and uneasy, until Loren breezily warned, "If you don't eat, you'll run out of energy and fall off your broom later." Startled into action, Harry began to eat ravenously. The tournament began. Hagrid led them around the edge of the Forbidden Forest to a circular hill, where spectator stands formed a ring around a huge, deep pit dug in the center. Jagged boulders lay scattered in the pit like the raw walls of a crude arena. The wind howled cold, but the students' enthusiasm stayed high. Prefects kept the crowd in order and cheered for their champions. Because Harry's inclusion in the tournament was unusual, Hogwarts students were divided. Most favored Cedric, but Gryffindor stood loyally behind Harry. St. George flags and Quidditch banners came out as they shouted encouragement. Loren leaned on the railing. He could see a canyon-like passage cut into the side of the hill, partitioned by rocks and wooden doors, leading to tents and a concealed enclosure, likely the champions' and the dragon's entrance. Hermione, estimating the distance, asked Ron, "From here, can Harry's summoning charm bring the firebolt?" "Don't worry," Ron thumped his chest. "We tried it at Hagrid's yesterday. It'll work. I even put the firebolt on the greenhouse roof to cut the distance in half. No problem. Merlin's smelly boots." Siamus's voice broke in as he stumbled toward them, equal parts excited and terrified. "You won't believe what I heard. They're drawing dragons," he blurted. "The first task is for the champion to get a golden egg from under a dragon. Oh my, dragons." From Seamus's gossip, Loren and the others learned the draw for the first task. Cedric Diggory would face the Swedish short snout, Pickly Greaves would face a Hebridean black, Fleur Delacour a Welsh green, Victor Krum a Chinese fireball, and Harry Potter the Hungarian horntail. "Welcome, welcome." Ludo Bagman's high, excited voice echoed through the stands. "Welcome, everyone, to the unprecedented Triwizard Tournament semifinals. It's an honor to be your commentator for this match, your old friend, Ludo Bagman. First task, snatching the golden egg from beneath the dragon's claws. The champions must retrieve a golden egg from under 5 ferocious brooding mothers and escape alive. The egg contains clues for the next task. Any champion who fails will be eliminated." "Oh, Dumbledore is positively senile," Madame Pomfrey huffed beside Professor McGonagall. "Last year it was Dementors, this year it's dragons. What on earth will he bring into the school next?" McGonagall's expression was only slightly exasperated. "Poppy, I'll need you to keep a close eye on the younger students. They may get hurt." "Hurt," Pomfrey snapped. "Of course they'll get hurt. You're making uninitiated children face dragons. I don't know what you were thinking." McGonagall's rebuttal died on her lips as Bagman continued his opening spiel. "And Mr. Fontana, the 4-4 school principals, Mr. Barty Crouch of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and myself, those are all the members of the judging panel." Crouch stood and waved at the crowd, offering a faint smile toward the press. He sat with quiet composure beneath the bright lights, the very image of ministry authority. Dumbledore's gaze lingered on the gathered students, and he said softly, "I understand you and Mr. Bagman started preparing these tasks before the Quidditch World Cup, Mr. Crouch. That must have been a great deal of work." "It was my duty," Crouch answered, "though even now I do wonder, There are only 5 champions, so why prepare 6 dragons? This is due to multiple considerations, Crouch replied. These dragons are brooding. The climate in Romania is very different from Hogwarts. I was worried one might fall ill or... He chuckled, and then something elsewhere cut him off. A savage roar erupted from the dragon enclosure a few hundred feet from the stands. The brass-colored dragon thrashed, beating its wings and whipping up a gale. The Peruvian viper-tooth reared, its horned, scaly tail lashing wildly. Tents made from wood and canvas were ripped apart in a single gust, reduced to splinters and strips of cloth. The viper-tooth's eyes were terrifyingly bloodshot. It had seemingly gone completely berserk, battering the ground and paying no heed to the clutch of eggs beneath it. Fortunately, the 6 dragons had been kept at a safe distance from one another, so the viper-tooth's rampage didn't trigger a chain reaction. The dragon keepers, led by Charlie Weasley, scrambled to calm the others and bravely to retrieve the eggs from beneath the viper-tooth. Loren looked around. The crowd in the stands had not yet panicked. The distance kept most of the younger students from hysteria. A few witches screamed, but many watched with wide eyes. At the judges' table, Karkaroff and Madame Maxime's hands had gone white. Fontana glanced at Dumbledore and was about to leap up to help control the beast when a hand gripped his shoulder. "This is a ministry matter. Leave it to me, Principal Fontana," Crouch said, patting him reassuringly. Fontana paused, surprised to hear Crouch claim the responsibility. Wouldn't they do better as a coordinated team? He looked at Dumbledore. The white-bearded headmaster was calm, unchanged in his posture. Fontana sat back down and watched Crouch take charge. Barty Crouch, who had trained as an Auror and now headed a department at the Ministry, moved with the precision of someone used to dealing with danger. With a flick of his wand, a dark shape flashed through the air toward the viper-tooth, like a coiling python. He appeared above the dragon's head in a heartbeat, wand steady, robes snapping, and for a moment he looked more impressive than some of the champions being promoted in the papers. The press corps went wild with camera flashes. Crouch ordered the dragon keepers to retire from the enclosure with a soft gesture, then faced the viper-tooth. The dragon spat a crimson, foul-smelling inferno toward him, venomous breath and flame, and the sound of it made some of the younger students flinch. Crouch chanted quietly, constellations of invisible magic weaving about him. The air seemed to harden, the flame struck an invisible barrier and slid harmlessly aside. The viper-tooth roared and lashed out, but its attacks met the same unseen defenses. Calmly, Crouch raised his wand and with one controlled motion sent a dull, gray-green jinx into the dragon's throat. A circular gust bloomed beneath the viper-tooth, kicking up yellow dust, and the dragon's fury simply stopped. Its great body collapsed with a heavy thud. Its eyelids drooped. It was unconscious, injured and subdued, not dead. Loren, who had watched closely, clicked his tongue. That was levitation for the initial flight, transfiguration to strengthen the air barrier, and a knockback jinx, simple if you know how to combine them. Hermione's eyes were worried. Will it be okay? Dragons don't go mad for no reason. Loren watched the keepers bind and administer salves. They're attending to it. It should be only injured and unconscious. The students relaxed under McGonagall's steadying influence, many looking back at Crouch with newfound admiration. Even some 7th years whispered about a career at the Ministry. At the judges' table, Karkaroff subtly moved his chair further from Crouch. No political statement, he simply distrusted Ministry types, and lately Crouch's reputation had been complicated. Madame Maxime and Fontana praised Crouch's composure. Karkaroff scowled. Crouch had not left the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of his own accord, Karkaroff reminded himself. His son, Barty Crouch Jr., had been revealed as a Death Eater and implicated in the Longbottom's torture. It had ended his career ambitions in the Ministry's enforcement wing. Dumbledore laughed softly. That was a truly fine performance. Whatever the champions do today, they won't top Mr. Crouch. If I were scoring, that would be a 10. The other judges grinned and echoed the sentiment. Crouch allowed a small smile. Headmaster, you flatter me. Let us continue. Bagman's voice came back, higher than before. Sorry about that unexpected excitement. The Dragon Keepers are re-entering the enclosure, and as you've seen, this has only made things more thrilling. He raised his voice for the crowd. I believe everyone understands the rules. Our safety officers will only step in for life-threatening situations or if a champion concedes. The students leaned forward, tense with anticipation. Without further ado, let us welcome our first champion, Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts, Bagman shouted. He drew a Swedish short snout. Madame Hooch's whistle cut through the air. When Cedric stepped out, the stadium exploded in cheers. The silver-blue short snout lay on a rock, steam curling from its nostrils. Its stray flames had already scorched the nearby stones into molten rock. The short snout was medium-sized, average in speed and agility, but the dragon's fire could melt gold and turn stone to slag. One touch could maim, a second could kill. Cedric did not rush in. He circled the perimeter, testing, watching the dragon's tail and every flick of its head. The short snout guarded a shallow nest. One egg shimmered with a faint golden gleam. Cedric tried to be cunning. He transfigured a rock into a yapping Newfoundland dog. The dog barked, and the short snout lunged. Cedric darted in while the dragon attacked the dog, snatching the golden egg in a breath. The short snout turned and spat a gout of flame. Only half of Cedric's trousers were burned. The dragon keepers rushed in to soothe it. Madame Pomfrey hurried to treat Cedric's injuries. Minutes later, he strode back to the stands, golden egg held aloft to thunderous acclaim. Bagman crowed, "Oh, that was dangerous. Too close for comfort, but superb." The judges awarded Cedric an average of 7 points. The next whistle blew, and a second champion entered. Loren leaned on the rail, chin propped on his hands, watching the next competitor pace toward his fate. He turned to Hermione. Madame Maxime would have tricked Hagrid. Karkaroff would use underhanded methods, so they all knew dragons were the first task. But Principal Fontana, he didn't look like the type. Hermione scanned the distant figure of Principal Fontana with uncertainty. He didn't seem like it, did he? From the aisle, Pickly Greaves emerged, face hard as flint. He was making his way toward the enormous Hebridean Black with a string of curses in his head and venom on his tongue. He had taken his grandmother's name, Seraphina Pickery's surname, as his given name, and he intended to make both the Greaves and Pickery names famous in the American wizarding world. Since Grindelwald once impersonated his grandfather and infiltrated Macusa, the Greaves family had worn a stain no marriage could wash away. Winning the Triwizard Tournament was his first step toward redemption, and this first task had struck him a heavy blow. He was the only champion who had not known in advance that he would face a dragon. Was the contest fair? Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, he snarled inwardly. They all knew. They're ganging up on Ilvermorny. Disgusting. Truly disgusting. His fingers whitened on his wand. Greaves had only the basics to fall back on. He used levitation charms to fling stones into the air and draw the Hebridean Black's attention, edging closer whenever he could. The Hebridean Black was massive, scales like polished ebony, with a line of sharp ridges down its spine. Its tail ended in a spear point. It was not acrobatic, but it was crushingly powerful. The dragon charred levitated stones with hot breath and swung its tail and claws at Greaves as it cleared the air. Greaves was quick, but the dragon's grazing strikes still found him. When a dragon's claws connected with flesh, the damage was savage, blood spattered, muscle torn. The crowd fell silent. Loren and Hermione watched, breathless, as the Ilvermorny student's uniform began to stain crimson. After 10 nerve-grinding minutes, Greaves, bleeding and battered, cradled the golden egg to his chest, only to be swept off his feet by a lethal swipe of the Hebridean Black's tail. 468. Each shows his or her special powers. Oh, very straightforward. I'm not sure that's wise. Bagman put on a mockingly grave tone as Madame Pomfrey led the unconscious Graves into the tent, drawing worried gasps from the younger witches and wizards. Judges, please cast your scores. All eyes swung to the judges' table. The mood there had shifted. It was subtly, pointedly awkward. Principal Fontana felt as if everyone around him was watching him oddly. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff kept glancing at the others and then back at him, as if they shared a private understanding that excluded him. The sensation made him uneasy, like a horned serpent crawling over his skin. Although Pickley's method of getting the golden egg was messy and not as polished as Cedric Diggory's earlier performance, he had stayed remarkably calm when he learned the first task would involve a dragon. He had used charms and skill to succeed under pressure. That was impressive. What were Maxime and Karkaroff looking at like that? Fontana wondered, but he kept a composed, dignified expression. The posture Ilvermorny's headmaster would be expected to show. Dumbledore met his eyes, then the others, and asked thoughtfully, "I'd like to ask, what sort of training have your champions had over the past month while they've been here?" Crouch's face remained impassive, as if the question concerned him not at all. Fontana, assuming the question was directed at him, answered cautiously, "Some regular dueling practice, and I explained the differences in wizarding traditions between countries. The rest of the time, I let him choose a few classes from your schools. I heard that Animagus and Patronus lessons were normally part of his curriculum, but they were canceled this year, and he was disappointed." A brief silence fell. Dumbledore's expression was complicated. Madame Maxime asked carefully, "Did you know the first task had already been set before we arrived? The dragon enclosure was in the Forbidden Forest." Fontana's unease deepened. "I didn't know the task would be a dragon, only that the venue was the Forbidden Forest. Pickley's training had been held in the open space by the Black Lake, some distance away." More silence, heavy enough to press on the ears. Crouch cleared his throat lightly. "Let's begin scoring." In the hush, Pickley Greaves, bloodied, disheveled, but standing, received the same average score as Cedric, 7. Fontana, who had given the lowest score, looked puzzled and turned to Dumbledore. "Why are your scores so high? Pickley took longer to get the egg and was more seriously hurt." "Eggelbert, we cannot judge merely by surface appearances," Dumbledore said, meaning in his tone and smile. "Graves deserved his score. Look at those bloodstains. Each one speaks of indomitable courage, of a will to keep going." He rubbed at the corners of his eyes as if he were moved. "That matters." Fontana hesitated, uncertain. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff each nodded. Only Crouch's mouth briefly twitched into something like a sarcastic smile. What at? No one could tell. The whistle blew. The third champion emerged. At the entrance, Loren and Hermione leant forward. Fleur Delacour glided out in pale blue silk. Her blouse was a light, long-sleeved chiffon patterned with flowers. The wind had raised goosebumps along her fair neck and arms, lending a chill grace to the late November forest. She had drawn a Welsh green dragon, a docile sort, medium-small, green-scaled, known to feed mostly on sheep and to avoid humans. It wasn't venomous nor famed for deadly fire. Of dragons, it was one of the least troublesome. There had been incidents, like the Ilfracombe affair in 1932, but they had been rare. The green dragon lay draped over a giant rock, lazy. When it noticed Fleur, it gave a soft, almost musical roar. Fleur, controlling the range of the dragon's breath, stepped forward and began to dance. Her dress hung perfectly, tracing her slender form. Her movements were light and precise. To some in the stands, she seemed like a fairy. Many boys were dumbstruck, and even some of the girls watched with varying expressions: admiration, envy, a touch of scorn. The obvious question buzzed in all their heads. Why was she dancing for a dragon? Hermione watched the dragon closely, but glimpses of Justin and others staring as if at a villa at the World Cup made her glance sideways. Loren caught her eye and grinned. She returned to the arena. As Fleur's steps became softer and slower, alert viewers noticed the dragon's lids drooping. Within minutes, the Welsh green's eyes shut. It went into a deep sleep. Fleur, relieved, rubbed her aching shoulders. The dance had gone on far longer than she'd anticipated. She crept forward, held up her skirt, and gently lifted the golden egg with both hands. Just as she declared success, the sleeping dragon snorted and a few golden flames sputtered from its nostrils, setting the hem of her skirt alight. Fleur flinched, conjured water to douse the flames, and backed away, embarrassed but unhurt. Ron watched her retreat and grinned idiotically. Even running away looks beautiful. Hermione shot him a disgusted look, then glanced at Loren, whose expression was clear and composed. She felt steadier for a moment. Loren's low voice tickled her ear. "I haven't seen Professor Granger dance yet. How about you dance for me for Christmas? Just for me." Hermione rolled her eyes and turned to watch the judges' reactions. "That was a clever approach," she murmured. Dumbledore chuckled softly. "I have always believed that charms and force are not the only ways to solve problems. In that dance, I saw communication. For that, I award a 9. Madame Maxime, visibly proud of her pupil, gave a perfect 10. Truly astonishing, she said. Fontana wrestled with his own unease. That Beauxbaton's champion had passed untouched, too smoothly, perhaps. But to match Maxime's generosity for Graves earlier, he awarded an 8. She should have been more careful at the end, Crouch commented, giving a 7. Bagman, still skeptical, muttered that the method took too long and wouldn't work on an agitated dragon, and gave a 7. Karkaroff mumbled something under his breath and flicked his wand. A thin beam of light formed a large 4 in the air. Maxime reacted as if slapped. 4 points? Fleur performed so excellently. Why only 4? Karkaroff sniffed. As I said, there was no display of charm skill, no combat technique. It was all trickery. Maxime calmed under her breath and shot him a look. Well said. Let's see Crumb's performance. A whistle heralded Victor Crumb. He strode out with a stormy expression. His dragon was a Chinese fireball. Bright red scales, a lion-like face rimmed with golden tassels, and the ability to blast out mushroom-shaped fireballs. Crumb didn't waste time. He cast a blinding spell so intense the dragon panic-struck, flailing and charging blindly. Crumb danced around the tail and talons carefully. In under 20 minutes, he seized the golden egg. The crowd erupted. Applause and cheers shattered the cold air. First champion to injure a dragon, some of the witches shouted in excitement. At the judges' table, Dumbledore frowned. A brilliant charm, but those dragon eggs should not have been damaged. He awarded a 6. There is life in those eggs. Madame Maxime agreed with a sad smile. Karkaroff, impressed by the speed and Crumb's condition afterward, gave a perfect score, but the average still only came to around 7. Last to go, the most fearsome, the Hungarian Horntail. Could fate be more unkind? In the champion's waiting tent, Harry sat behind the canvas, heart hammering. Besides the chaos of the crowd, he listened to Bagman's commentary for scraps of information. Scenes of the day kept flickering through his mind, refusing to be pinned down. He tried to concentrate on the task ahead, but his thoughts scattered. Ludo Bagman was strange. Fleur Delacour was beautiful. Pickley had been unlucky to only learn about the dragons today. Crumb was taciturn and cold. He had meant to speak to Crumb about seeker technique and about handling dragons, but the Bulgarian had remained aloof. Fleur was beautiful. Harry shook himself and tried to focus, but his mind wandered again. Time slipped by until a faint whistle swelled into a sharp, clear shriek like ice cracking. He pushed through the tent flap and walked the path along the hedges into the arena. The winter wind in the forbidden forest brought the damp scent of trees, stinging his face and clearing some of the tightness in his chest. Hundreds of faces watched from the stands. Ron, Loren, and Hermione sat together on the right side. Some people waved, some shouted. The noise washed over him and receded until it was only a background hum. Across the enclosure, the Hungarian Horntail crouched, guarding its nest. Its wings were half folded. Its body was huge and armored with scales. Its barbed tail had gouged the earth into pits. Those fierce yellow eyes fixed on him. Harry met that gaze steadily. In his nightmares over the past month, dragons had always come for him, maws and flames and the world splintering into mirrors, so standing here before a real dragon felt oddly liberating. He raised his wand and called, "Firebolt, Accio!" A whoosh answered him. A streak of fiery red light cut across the sky, flying swiftly toward him. 469. End of first task. Before today, the other Gryffindors had felt a little inferior compared to the other houses. With a 14-year-old champion from their own house, they were certain Harry hadn't cheated, but it was still against the rules. Even though every Gryffindor backed him, they couldn't be completely sure his skills matched those of the other champions. There had always been a lingering unease. Now the whole house watched breathless as a shooting star streaked across the sky, fell into the arena, and became the firebolt in Harry's hands. Heat shot through them all. Their hair prickled, their blood quickened. Ron and the others were rapt with excitement. Ginny was positively entranced, muttering to herself. Loren breathed a relieved, "Tsk, that was worth the dreams I wove for him every night." And Hermione finally found a chance to smile and say, "Yes, Professor Morgan was very dedicated." At the judges' table, Dumbledore's blue eyes showed approval, and the other heads of school nodded. For a 14-year-old champion to exploit the firebolt's speed while also keeping himself safe, That was clever and well done. Only Karkaroff was inwardly irritated. Why hadn't they thought of that? With Victor's skill, he would have scored higher. In the arena, the youngest champion swung a leg over his broom, pushed off, and shot into the air. The firebolt took him up in quick, tight circles. Harry flew as effortlessly as a fish in water, looping around the Hungarian horntail. The dragon craned its neck, tracking him with its massive head, whipping its tail and belching fire that Harry dodged with inches to spare. Finally, the horntail rose, spread its wings, and flapped. Harry seized the 1 or 2 breaths of stiffness before it took off. He swooped, snatched the golden egg, and the dragon froze, its huge face baffled almost as if it were human. Before it could regain itself and pursue, Charlie and the keepers had rushed in with various dried meats laced with a potion that quickly sent the dragon into a blissful sleep. "Look," Bagman bellowed. "Look, everyone! Our youngest champion got the golden egg in the fastest time." Harry held the egg aloft and circled the arena on his broom, smiling plainly. The stands erupted, shouts, screams, clapping. An excellent flying performance, beautiful and decisive. For that, I give 10 points. Bagman croaked, flushed and giddy, more joyful than Harry. "Let's see the judges' scores," he went on. "Madame Maxime, 8 points. Oh, a little stingy," Bagman read. "Mr. Crouch, 9 points. If you ask me, Potter deserves more. Headmaster Dumbledore, 9 points. Very fair and just. Principal Fontana from across the Atlantic, 9 points. Adding those up, there's a lot of hope. Finally, Principal Karkaroff of Durmstrang, 4 points?" Bagman's face reddened with anger, but as commentator and judge, he kept his temper. He continued in a ridiculous, off-balance tone. "What a miser with praise. It's clear to anyone with eyes. Even so, Harry Potter temporarily holds first place with an average of 8 points. Let's congratulate Harry Potter." The roar that followed drowned the stadium. The earth seemed to tremble as joy pushed the cold east wind back into the trees. That evening's feast was louder and rowdier than any before. Everyone argued about the day's performances: Cedric's cleverness, Graves's grit, Fleur's beguiling display, Crumb's ruthlessness, and Harry's nimble flying. The younger students kept standing on their benches to stare at the champions, full of awe. At the head of the Gryffindor table, Harry ate slowly, still buzzing, as one after another 5 or 6 girls from Beauxbatons, Ilvermorny, and Hogwarts came over to congratulate him in their peculiar accents. After he politely endured a Hufflepuff girl, Harry rubbed his jaw and complained, "Honestly, couldn't they wait until I'm full?" Ron's knife scraped his plate. Envy twisted his face. Ginny bit her lip, half angry at the other girls and half ashamed at her timidity. Hermione looked around and asked Loren, "Where's the Ilvermorny champion?" "Still in the hospital wing," Loren said, sipping rich mushroom soup and shaking his head. "Seamus says almost every bone that could be broken was. He'll be in bed a couple of days. Ilvermorny's first time. They're inexperienced." Agilbert Fontana at his own head table silently agreed, chewing mechanically on fish and chips. He'd visited his student that evening and thought of poor Pickley's complaints. He glanced toward Madame Maxime chatting with Hagrid, then at Karkaroff avoiding the ministry officials while whispering to the potions professor, then at Dumbledore telling one of his bland jokes. "They're all bad people," Fontana thought, grinding the crispy fish bones between his teeth. Who would have imagined the Triwizard Tournament, older than even Ilvermorny's founding, would turn out to be a contest riddled with shadowy dealings? Who would have imagined that of 4 schools and 5 champions, only his Pickley didn't know the first task would be a dragon? Look at them. Witches dancing, charms cast to dazzle the dragon. Only Pickley hadn't prepared and was now in the hospital wing eating plain pumpkin porridge and a chicken breast. Dumbledore offered, "Don't worry too much, Agilbert. Graves' injuries are superficial. He'll be out soon, and his score was very good." Fontana glared, drained his glass, and scowled. No wonder they'd given Graves a high mark. Those Hogwarts champions weren't clean either. Poor Pickley. Back in the Gryffindor common room, the twins had hoisted Harry onto their shoulders and were spinning him around amid cheers and whoops. Cakes and pitchers of pumpkin juice and butterbeer were piled high. Lee Jordan had set off fizzing whiz-bees, and the air glittered with sparks. Harry felt lightheaded from all the attention. "I can't believe I got through the dragon with nothing worse than a scare," he murmured, and the second task isn't for another 3 months. Speaking of which, Lee picked up Harry's golden egg and weighed it in his hands. It's heavy. Open it, Harry. Let's see what's inside. Harry blinked, looking around. Does anyone want me to open it? Of course, the younger student shouted. Open it. Loren, standing near the crowd, muttered something and cast a bubblehead charm on himself, then reached over and covered Hermione's ears. She didn't struggle. Instead, she leaned into him, comforted by the warmth of his hand. The second after Harry cracked the egg open, a howl, not a song, but a raw, piercing wail, ripped through the room. Hermione's fair brows knit together. The sound was like nothing she'd heard except at Sir Nicholas's Death Day party, when the ghostly band shrieked on a saw-like instrument. Harry slammed the egg shut. His head throbbed. What was that? Seamus asked, clutching his ears. Sounded like a banshee. Harry, next time you might have to avoid banshees. It sounds like someone being tortured, Neville said, his face pale as sausages bounced off the floor. Are you going to face the Cruciatus? Don't be ridiculous. That's illegal, George said. They can't use unforgivables on champions. It sounded a bit like Percy singing, though. Harry rubbed his temples and stared at the egg. This is really a puzzle. When he still intended to investigate, the crowd scattered a little, nervous again. Hermione looked to Loren. You know what the egg's clue means, don't you? Loren, who had removed the bubblehead charm, let a crumb of cake fall into his mouth and pretended to be ruminative. Do I know, or do I not know? That's a good question. He took another bite and then said more seriously, It's the end of the month. Dobby and Winky should be paid. Why don't we go see them? Hermione's eyes brightened. Okay, I want to see how the other house elves treat them too. And Wheat, Loren added. I need to speak to him about something. What about? Don't pry into things you shouldn't. What should be pried into and what shouldn't? Things that can be pried into should be pried into. Things that can't should not. Hermione glared, feeling a headache rising. A little more body language might help him be clear, she thought. The castle was dark, but downstairs in the kitchen the lamps were bright. Steam rose from copper pots on the fire, and the smell of broth filled the air. Wheat, the house elf in charge, explained in a squeaky voice that the new French dishes made some of the soups more complicated. He wore a butler's jacket and an apron. The socks Hermione had given him covered his bare feet. Winky had set out chairs and fidgeted at the edge of the room, apron neat, her blue cap patterned with clouds. She kept glancing nervously at Loren and lowering her eyes when Hermione looked at her. Sir, have a cup of hot tea, Winky offered when Loren opened his mouth. Dobby darted over with a tray of tea and pastries and looked surprised to see only 2 visitors. Mr. Morgan, Miss Granger, didn't Harry Potter come down? Did you see him face the dragon today? Loren asked, blowing on a mug. Dobby nodded eagerly. Dobby was hiding in the dragon's tent, he said proudly. Dobby thought if Harry Potter couldn't manage the dragon, Dobby would secretly help. You're lucky you didn't interfere, Loren told him. Any small help would have been noticed by those judges. Dobby getting punished is better than Harry Potter getting hurt, Dobby said firmly. That Mr. Graves bled a lot. Dobby does not want to see Mr. Potter bleed. After talking with Dobby and leaving the anxious Winky aside, Hermione turned to Wheat. Wheat, recently, how have the other house elves been talking about Winky and Dobby? Winky and Dobby, Wheat hesitated. Many house elves praise Winky. Hermione's eyes lit up. Praise? Wheat looked down at the socks on his toes and spoke softly. Many house elves feel she has endured humiliation to return to her former master's house. Her loyalty makes her endure torments and insults. They think she is worthy of admiration. Endured humiliation? Hermione protested. How is fair pay and holidays humiliation or insult? Wheat could only look at Loren helplessly. Loren turned to the little house elf who had been standing apart. Dobby, tell us about Winky's last month. Give details. Dobby's face brightened, and he poured out a stream of words. How Winky had found things difficult at first, how he had helped negotiate her wages and holidays, how he'd taken her to Hogsmeade after she got paid, how they'd gone shopping during their time off. He chattered about every small kindness he'd managed for her. Loren listened, then looked across the kitchen at Winky, who had been quiet and small for almost an hour. Winky, he said gently, I want to know how you felt this past month. 470, House Elf Education Program. Winky hesitated for a moment, shuffling slowly in front of them, her slender fingers clutching the corner of her apron and twisting it over and over. When the other house elves talked about the house elf, Winky, who had been dismissed a month ago, they assumed she was enduring the shame of taking wages and holidays, suffering only to return to her former master, like the traitorous Dobby. They imagined her buying gloves, socks, and sweets with dirty wages, even hiding her identity to be dragged into the hogshead for a drink. To those who still praised loyalty, Winky was a model. If any of them had suffered such humiliation, they'd have been unable to bear it and would have thrown themselves into their master's fireplace. But only Winky knew the truth. Admittedly, the first days had been terrible. She couldn't sleep, and her tears soaked her pillow. She felt she had disgraced her ancestors. Her forebears had served Mr. Crouch for generations, and now she had been driven from the house, reduced to taking wages and holidays, signs of laziness in their eyes. During the day, she worked in the kitchen and worried about other house elves' strange looks. Whenever 3 or more gathered whispering, she felt as if they were spitting on her. Those days of torment, however, lasted less than a week. Soon she discovered that the other house elves admired her, thinking she was stoically enduring humiliation to return to her master. From then on, their glances no longer felt unbearable. Winky even found she rather enjoyed the respect. She received her first wages, and on a weekend, Dobby took her to Gladrag's Wizardwear for gloves and socks, and then to the Hog's Head for a butterbeer. Dobby claimed it was the favored drink of noble young wizards. Winky could make butterbeer herself, and she was sure she did it better than the Hog's Head owner. Still, the butterbeer bought with wages in that shabby, stale-smelling inn tasted different. The rich foam, the sour and slightly bitter tang with a faint sweetness on the tongue, she told herself she could taste the freedom Dobby talked about. Standing there, head bowed, Winky listened as Hermione asked, anxious, "How do you feel, Winky?" Winky looked up at the two of them, then lowered her head again. In a timid voice, she answered, "As long as Winky can return to her master, Winky will do anything." Hermione looked frustrated. Loren nodded without much expression. "But in my opinion, your behavior is not up to standard." Winky's face paled. "We agreed you would speak to Headmaster Dumbledore or Professor McGonagall about your wages yourself, but you let Dobby negotiate for you. Mistakes must be punished." Loren looked at the house elf in front of him. Her tennis ball-sized eyes were beginning to water as if she might burst into tears any moment. "Then the deadline we set is extended by half a year until the end of the school year. For these 6 months, you will continue the same duties as Dobby. If you perform well, before the end-of-year feast, I will arrange for your return to the Crouch household." Hermione and Dobby looked to Winky. For a moment, she froze. The tears receded, and she stood there, blank, unsure what to say. She did not want to admit that a secret, shame-faced joy had stirred in her chest. After a few seconds, she answered softly, I understand." Loren stretched as they walked on the path that led back toward the kitchens. The kitchen smelt of thick soup, and the fireplaces radiated warmth. He felt a little sleepy after making his long speech to educate Winky. Hermione glanced back at Dobby and Winky talking quietly, then turned her face away and pursed her lips. "Professor Morgan really knows how to handle things." "You can't call me professor anymore. Call me mentor," Loren corrected. "If you drag this out until the end of the school year, how will you persuade Mr. Crouch then?" Loren rested his chin on his hand, thinking a moment. "Who knows? We'll deal with it when the time comes. The world is always full of surprises." Hermione was silent for a moment, recognizing the vagueness in his tone but not pressing it. "Mentor Morgan has already guided Winky, and Dobby doesn't need guidance. What about Wheat? What do you plan to do?" Wheat, who had been walking behind them, blurted, "Wheat thinks it's fine now, Miss Granger. Don't worry." Loren was amused by his nervousness. "Don't worry, I won't force you to do anything you don't want to. But I do have a request." "Oh, okay, Mr. Morgan. Tell Wheat." "As you know, Ilvermorny is participating in the Triwizard Tournament. It's a magic school from the United States, and I need to understand that country's history and culture. The material is vast and scattered, and too troublesome for me to sort through myself." Wheat looked confused. Is there anything I can help with? I want you to consult the relevant books and materials and clearly outline the major historical events in that country since the 15th century and the racial and cultural developments on that continent. Hermione's eyes lit up. Wheat's head spun. It took him a long moment to understand Loren's meaning. The words were unfamiliar and had nothing to do with washing dishes and cooking. You don't have to rush. In a few days, I'll send you the books. Just copy down concisely the cause, development, outcome, and impact of each event. Loren smiled gently. Am I being clear? Wheat scratched his head, his high voice losing its usual confidence. Wheat doesn't know. Wheat will do his best to follow Mister's instructions. They reached the kitchen door. A large green pear in the fruit bowl seemed to sleep, its round belly rising and falling. Loren stopped and rubbed the felt hat on its head. It's not a difficult job. Take your time and you'll understand. Wheat looked up, still puzzled. Understand what? How to do it, or the meaning behind it. The house elf who had spent his life doing simple, physical tasks understood nothing of such things. Perhaps he never would fully understand. Still, on that cold November night, he answered loudly, "Okay, Mr. Morgan." As December began, the weather grew colder. Howling north winds drove sleet across the grounds. Monday arrived, and with it a fresh round of discomfort. Care of magical creatures in the morning was a trial. Braving the cold to leave the castle was unpleasant, and the students were grateful for the castle's warm fires and thick walls whenever they passed Durmstrang's great ship docked on the lake. The ship rolled in strong winds, its black sails snapping against the dark sky. Imagine how cold it must be in Durmstrang's quarters, everyone said. Care of magical creatures grew more disagreeable by the week. Hagrid's creatures produced fumes that made the students woozy. Madame Maxime's horses were regularly given their favorite pure malt whiskey. The temporary stable near the edge of the Forbidden Forest stank of fermented feed, and the blast-ended scroots added a fishy, rotten tang. The class felt like torture. As the several large boxes of blast-ended scroots matured, the creatures became more aggressive and turned on one another until only 10 remained. Now each scroot was nearly 6 feet long, armored in thick gray skin with wildly flailing legs, fire-breathing, explosive tails, stings, and suckers, altogether the most repulsive thing the students had seen. I'm not sure if they hibernate. Let's try and see if they want to sleep. We'll settle them in these boxes. Hagrid led the students as they put the blast-ended scroots into hay-lined boxes and closed the lids, and the boxes promptly exploded, scattering smoking splinters across the ground. 10 blast-ended scroots charged off through the pumpkin patch. The 2 divination lessons in the afternoon were a welcome relief. They still had to draw astrological charts and make predictions, but Professor Trelawney's florid critiques, predicting absurd misfortunes, had the students giggling the whole class. That evening, after a shower, Loren padded downstairs in his pajamas and found Hermione bent over the table by the window, working on homework. Her quill had filled the lower half of the parchment. She must be nearly finished. Ron and Seamus were playing gobstones by the fire, and Harry sat on the sofa staring blankly at the chandelier. Loren flopped onto the sofa, making it bounce. "Harry, so relaxed. Have you figured out the clue to the golden egg yet?" Harry glanced at him with a look of resentment. "This afternoon, when the blast-ended scroots went wild, you pulled Hermione out and ran into the hut, leaving us out there to face them." "How about it? I ran fast, didn't I?" Harry sighed. "Let's talk about the golden egg, Loren. I've tried several ways, and every time I open it, there's that piercing screech. Any ideas?" "You've learned the bubblehead charm, haven't you?" "Bubblehead charm?" Harry looked puzzled. "I learned it ages ago, but what does that have to do with the egg?" "No relation," Loren said, adopting his earnest professorial tone. "I was just asking. Don't always think about cheating. Try it yourself first. If you still can't figure it out by the Christmas holidays, I'll tell you." "You sound like Hermione," Harry said. "Ludo Bagman said that cheating is a tradition of the Triwizard Tournament." "That's true. I suggest you say that in front of the Ilvermorny champion, too." Harry's face went blank. Pickley Greaves had left the hospital and was back in classes with the 7th years. Every time they crossed paths, his angry look made people feel guilty. The other champions were avoiding him. Harry muttered, unsure, I should have reminded him when I reminded Cedric. If you knew the secret of the golden egg, would you tell him? Loren asked. Harry hesitated. I guess I would? Sk. You keep thinking. Loren sat down beside Hermione and sniffed. Her freshly washed hair smelled good. He leaned over to look at her parchment, which was filled edge to edge. Why is this a Muggle Studies essay? I thought you were writing ancient runes. I finished the runes translation in class, Hermione said, moving a wet parchment to dry the ink and dipping her quill in the inkwell as she began a new page. I told Professor Burbage what you asked Wheat to do, and she was very interested. She thinks house elves and American slaves have many similarities. This isn't homework. It's a research topic the professor and I are working on together. If it goes well, it might even be published in a Muggle Studies journal. A Muggle Studies journal that sells worse than the Quibbler? Loren teased, twining a curl of her damp hair around his finger. Most wizards think Muggle Studies is niche, which is why the journal doesn't sell well. But a lot of people are beginning to notice the influence of Muggle culture. Have you sent the materials to Wheat? Loren asked. Hermione answered. Which eras? From the 16th century colonial period through the Civil War. He probably won't understand anything after that. Loren grabbed another curl and fell into a mock serious study. Late that night in the Gryffindor common room, after lights out and with most oil lamps extinguished, a few dime candles still burned. The fireplace had only a few glowing embers. Harry stared at the golden egg on the table, the lines of thought sharpening in his eyes. Loren had mentioned the bubblehead charm. It was unlikely to have been a random suggestion. After a long time thinking, Harry took a deep breath, murmured the incantation, cast the bubblehead charm on himself, and resolutely opened the golden egg. Ah! Chapter 471, Christmas News. It was Thursday in Transfiguration, and the lesson was drawing to a close. The students had finished the homework Professor McGonagall assigned. The guinea fowl they'd been asked to transfigure into guinea pigs were already sitting in a large cage on the podium. The homework, written on parchments bound together in a notebook, read, "Give examples to illustrate what adjustments a transfiguration spell must undergo when performing interspecies transformation." The bell could ring at any moment. Professor McGonagall stood on the platform, delivering her final remarks. We have covered most of the new material for this semester. For live transfiguration not involving human bodies, I have some recommended reading. Optional, of course. Hermione diligently copied down the list in her notebook, her face intent and concentrated. Loren yawned and propped his chin on his hand when a chattering sound behind him caught his attention. He turned to see Harry and Ron pretending to sword fight. "In the name of Gryffindor," Ron cried. "I also, in the name of Gryffindor." Harry brandished a rubber haddock, while Ron parried with a tin-plated parrot. The quality of the joke wands Fred and George sold was dubious at best. The haddock's painted head was already coming loose from repeated thrusts. "Potter! Weasley! Pay attention, please!" Professor McGonagall's voice cracked like a whip. Harry and Ron jumped and sat up. The rest of the class sobered quickly. "Can your behavior be more age-appropriate?" she continued, scowling over the room. "Listen carefully, especially you, Potter. The Christmas ball is approaching. It's a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament and an excellent opportunity to entertain our foreign guests. The ball is open only to students in their 4th year and above, although you may invite someone younger as a guest." At that, Lavender Brown jabbed Hermione's back and gave a high little giggle. Parvati Patil tried hard not to laugh. Both of them winked at Hermione and flicked teasing looks between her and Loren. Hermione flushed and buried her face in her notes. Professor McGonagall went on, "You must wear dress robes. The ball will be held in the Great Hall at 8 o'clock on Christmas night and will end at midnight. It will, no doubt, be an opportunity to, relax and enjoy yourselves." There was a ripple of suppressed laughter. McGonagall's hair was always pulled into a tight bun. She had never seemed to let her hair down. She raised a disapproving eyebrow. "However, do not mistake this for a relaxation of our standards of behavior. If any Gryffindor disgraces the school, I shall be most distressed." "Potter, stay behind after class. I need a word with you." The bell rang. Harry remained, a little pale. Ron slowly packed up and waited by the door. The rest of the students hurried out, books under shoulders. Lavender and Parvati waved and chattered at Hermione as they left. Hermione slung her canvas bag over her shoulder and looked around, spotting a familiar figure leaning against a desk, miming wand swooshes with the haddock whose head was half detached. He grinned when she met his eyes. For some reason, Hermione smiled back and walked toward him. They left the classroom side by side. The corridor was quiet with only a few late students drifting past. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Hermione said, linking her arm through his. "Knew what?" "A lot." She glanced at him with a teasing smile. "The Triwizard Tournament, the Christmas ball, the dresses. Your surprise plan was a flop from the start." "Was it?" Loren asked lightly. "Yes." Hermione's smile grew. "I remember the dresses, the ones from Twillifit and Tattings. Two of them, one a pale lavender blue and the other—" She let his blank look draw the rest of the answer out of him. "Need me to remind you, Mr. Morgan?" He looked half accused and half amused. "Professor Granger always tells the truth," he protested, yet she lied and said she was going to Flourish and Blots when she actually went to Twillifit and Tattings. "You went to Twillifit and Tattings?" Loren's eyes narrowed in mock horror. "Then what about the dress robes you bought me? When are you giving those to me?" "When I receive my dresses," Hermione replied triumphantly. "I refuse," Loren declared with mock indignation. "I want my robes first." Hermione punched his arm. "Fine, I'll give them to you after dinner, all right?" He grinned, gently uncurled her fingers, and laced their hands together. Her palm was warm and soft. Dinner in the Great Hall was noisy and bright. At the Gryffindor table, Fred held out a plate. "Want a jam tart, Seamus?" Seamus eyed the offering suspiciously. "Are you sure you didn't?" "Don't worry," Fred said with a grin. "We didn't do anything." "Watch out for the custard creams," George added loudly. Neville nervously picked up a custard cream. Under everyone's gaze, his face lengthened for a moment and golden feathers sprouted all over him until he looked like a large canary. Then, within a minute, the feathers fell away and he was himself again. The table erupted in laughter. Harry stared into his plate and sighed. Loren slid a custard cream onto Harry's plate and murmured, "What's got you down? McGonagall put you in detention?" "Not exactly," Harry said, then corrected himself with a rueful nod. "Close enough." "Just for pretending to fight with toy fish?" Ron asked, surprised. "It's more than that," Harry said at last. "By tradition, the champions and their partners open the ball. I'm the champion, so I have to dance first. I need to find a partner." Hermione cast a quick glance at Ginny, who was nervously cutting her steak. Hermione's stomach tightened. Ron waved a greasy chicken leg reassuringly. "You beat a Hungarian horntail, Harry. Girls will be lining up to dance with you." At that, Ginny's steak vanished from her plate as if it had been eaten by air, and her knife and fork clattered down. Hermione quickly looked elsewhere. Harry closed his eyes and pictured Christmas Eve. Top hat, tails, a girl in a frilly dress at his side. His Aunt Petunia's idea of proper formal wear. He shuddered. "I'd rather fight a dragon again." "Really?" Loren raised an eyebrow. "Then again. Fair enough." The hall filled with snickering and excited whispers about the ball. It quickly became the hottest topic, eclipsing even the Triwizard Dragon task. Girls clustered in small groups, whispering about who would go with whom and what they would wear. After dinner, Loren pulled Hermione outside. The courtyard was cold and brisk. They took a few slow laps to walk off their meal. On the way back to the Gryffindor common room, a group of girls swept past them, squealing and quickening their pace when they saw the pair. Loren watched them go. "Why do they always travel in packs?" Hermione frowned. "I don't know. Seems inconvenient," he said. "If someone wants to ask one of them to the ball, how do they catch them alone?" Hermione's eyes flashed. "Who do you want to invite?" Loren pretended to think. "I wouldn't consider older students. I'm not limiting myself to Gryffindor for younger ones." "Ouch!" He grabbed his side and winced. "You made me think about it properly, and now you're cross because I pinched you?" Hermione teased. She stopped suddenly, took a small, neatly wrapped box from around her neck. The ribbon bore Twillifit and Tatting's stamp, and handed it to him. Loren's face went serious. "What I said earlier was merely an ordinary student's analysis," he announced in mock formality. "In truth, Miss Granger, I would very much like to invite you to be my partner at the ball." "That's just an opinion. Not an invitation, Hermione said deadpan. Miss Granger, Loren said more formally, would you accompany me to the Christmas ball as my partner? She paused theatrically, then a faint smile curved her lips. When they reached the portrait hole, she slapped the box into his hands. Reluctantly, I agree. Miss Granger has excellent taste, Loren said, saying the password to the fat lady. He was the first through the hole, cradling the box. Hermione pulled on his sleeve. Hey, where's my dress? I forgot where I put it. I'll go back and look, he said, and dashed up the stairs and into the boys' dormitory. Hermione watched him go, incredulous. In the boys' dormitory, Neville was awkwardly practicing dance steps in front of a mirror when the door opened. Loren popped in, closed the door behind him, and with a small theatrical bow, produced from the box a set of beautifully tailored dress robes. He held them up and preened in front of the mirror, grinning like a child. Hermione gave them to me, he announced, folding the robes carefully and tucking them back into the box like a treasure. Harry and Ron, who had been by the window fretting about partners, came over at the sound. They fell suddenly quiet, looking from the box to Loren and back. Of course, Loren didn't have to worry about a partner, and he'd even been given his robes. Comparison was a painful thing. The week that followed brought changes across classes. Professor Flitwick, seeing how distracted the students were, relaxed his lectures. He let them play games and chatted amiably with the front row, delighting in Harry's spectacular summoning charm from the dragon task and telling Neville stories about the Toad Choir. Hagrid stopped forcing students to interact with the blast-ended Scroots and let them wander the paddock, enjoying the fresh winter air. He took to asking for grooming tips: how much perfume to use, what kind of buttonhole to wear, how to avoid stepping on one's partner during a dance. Professor Trelawney grew more melancholic than usual, complaining that Christmas made the price of sherry soar. Students passing her in the corridors often smelled strong spirits and heard her lament that the castle's gaiety disturbed her inner eye. A few professors remained as implacable as ever. McGonagall, Snape, and Moody still expected students to work hard. Professor Binns, as oblivious as a ghostly historian can be, trudged on through his notes on goblin rebellions without so much as a flicker of interest in the Christmas fuss. As December passed and the cold deepened, Hogwarts grew noisier and more excited. Rumors about the ball buzzed through the castle. Dumbledore supposedly bought 800 barrels of spiced mead from Madame Rosmerta, the Weird Sisters had been booked, and vampires might be invited. Most of the rumors were outrageous by any sensible standard, but when Dumbledore's name was attached, even the wildest stories seemed to carry a hint of possibility. 472, bold idea, December 17th, Saturday. In the afternoon, Loren and Hermione walked along the frozen surface of the Black Lake. The lake lay calm beneath a thin ice layer. The crisp, cold air cleared the post-lunch drowsiness. Ice had formed along the rocks at the shore with a faint crunch underfoot. Loren bit down on a chocolate crisp, pressing a nut against his front teeth with his tongue and savoring the clean snap. Loren, when are you actually going to give me the dress? Hermione glanced at the dolphin pendant at his throat, suspicion in her eyes. Knowing his habit of stuffing things into odd places, it was very likely the little Twillifit and Tattings box she'd been wanting was tucked in there. Her look turned dangerous. Loren stepped back 2 paces to avoid it, one hand coming to rest on Hermione's shoulder as he pushed her forward. Don't be sad, don't be hasty. If life deceives you. It's not life that's deceiving me. It's Loren Morgan, the villain. Hermione's voice was soft and mock-mournful, but the levity in his antics was working. She couldn't stay cross. Loren grinned and gave her a gentle shove on the slippery ice. Want to hear the villain's plan for flying magic? It's all based on the levitation charm. Hermione's feet stayed together and her shoulders were a little back as she skated forward, forced into the motion. She tried to stop a smile rising, but failed. You're changing the subject again. I don't want to hear it. There were plenty of ways to fly in the magical world, Loren began, undeterred. Carpets and brooms, thestrals and hippogriffs, even bird animagi. A little to their right, a group of students were practicing the Patronus charm. The colors of their robes gave away a mix of schools. Ilvermorny and Beauxbaton students clustered around two Hufflepuffs, probably trying to coax the secret of a good Patronus. Graves and Fleur were there. No one from Durmstrang. Threads of silvery mist curled from wand tips and were quickly lost to the cold wind. The Ilvermorny witch named Boot sniffed at Graves in surprise and tried again with renewed determination. A few people nearby noticed the pair at the shore and kept glancing that way. Back in the Great Hall, Ginny brushed snow from her shoulders and came in from the lake, leading Gabrielle by the hand. Gabrielle, younger and a little shy, and met with some reserve by a few Beauxbaton students, had trouble making friends, so Ginny often took her along. During afternoon tea, the hall smelled sickly sweet, full of biscuits and pastries. The girls loved the brightly colored macarons, then complained about the grease and mourned that their preterm dresses no longer fit. The boys favored sugar-dusted donuts. Fats and carbs sent a haze of dopamine through their brains and made them chatty about the partners they hoped to have for the dance, hearts racing with hormones and adrenaline. Harry and Ron, still partnerless, were part of the discussion. Ginny carried 2 pumpkin juices and hesitated at the end of the Gryffindor table before sitting Gabrielle beside Ron. It was natural for a Weasley to sit by one of her brothers. She handed Gabrielle the drink and shoved a donut into the little girl's hands, then lowered her own cup and listened closely, trying not to show how she was eavesdropping. "We need to hurry, or all the good girls will be taken," Ron whispered, lowering his voice. "Yeah," Harry frowned. "But who should we ask?" He'd had a passing thought about inviting Cho Chang, but it vanished when he remembered she was already involved with Cedric. Ron rattled off what he'd heard. Loren and Hermione, Rolf and Luna, Neville's with Hannah from Hufflepuff. No surprise there. Seamus and Dean aren't set yet, but they've got targets. Harry was mentally making a list. "We don't know the other houses well, but it can't be a Slytherin. They're taller than me. People would laugh. Has to be pretty. Eloise Midgen's face has more zits than my freckles. Preferably someone who plays Quidditch, so at least we'll have something to talk about." Harry paused and then, half laughing, looked at Ron. "What if I ask Ginny?" Ginny choked on her pumpkin juice, but managed to keep it down with heroic self-control, her face flushing bright red. Gabrielle peered at her in confusion while she clutched her cup and tried not to betray how shocked she was. "Ha!" Ron grinned, incredulous. "Harry, you must be joking." Harry made a dry laugh, suddenly embarrassed, and changed tack. "I was thinking we could pair with younger girls. What do you think?" "That's not a bad idea." Ginny stared at her pumpkin juice as if the porcelain cup might shatter. The emotional roller coaster of the afternoon was almost too much. Gabrielle blinked at Ginny. Her friend's expression was so animated she seemed like someone who should be photographed. Just as the brewing domestic tragedy was about to reach a head, footsteps sounded near the long table. Hermione entered the hall, and Ginny's gaze stamped dimly fixed on her, the only friend who knew her secret feelings. Hermione crossed the room, and Harry and Ron both looked up. "Back from practice?" Harry asked. "Where's Loren? Your robes are muddy. Did you fall?" Hermione pursed her lips. Ron, excited, called out, "Hermione, come help us decide on partners. Harry's planning to ask Ginny. Can you imagine?" Hermione's lips twitched in the cold as she turned to look at Ginny, who looked back full of grievance. By the lake, Loren had been leaning against a beech tree, the back of his robes streaked with dried mud, thinking. Strange, when they fell, Hermione had been in front, and he'd somehow ended up as the cushion underneath. Luckily, the little group practicing Patronuses hadn't seen them tumble. The Black Lake had become a favorite practice spot for charms. The castle's corridors and courtyards were protected by old magics that made most spells useless, and abandoned classrooms were dull training grounds. Professor Flitwick's recent talk at the Charms Club about the importance of basic charms had driven students to the lake for the livelier feedback of splashing fish and visible effects. Loren smirked at the memory of the one Gryffindor who'd cast a blasting charm into the lake and been dunked repeatedly by the giant squid and merpeople. He didn't have to think hard to name the culprit, Finnegan. Small accidents happened when practicing charms. Loren's mind shifted back to flying. There were many examples in history and legend. Dumbledore had once intertwined flying magic and apparition to travel in the Albanian forest, moving with frightening ease. McGonagall had used a Transfiguration-derived form of flying when they went into the Chamber of Secrets. Precise, but inconvenient. Snape's odd, cloak-assisted flight mimicked bats, and there were Death Eater techniques that turned bodies into gray mist. But the version Loren understood best was the one derived from the levitation charm that Flitwick had demonstrated to him in lessons. Light, nimble, and easy to control. If he could apply levitation to clothing and accessories to free the body from gravity, and then solve movement without leverage through something like the summoning charm, flying might become practical. He spread his arms and concentrated. A faint magical vibration rippled through his robes and shoes. Loren rose slowly off the ground. The sensation of stepping on air and the easing of weight shifted his center of gravity, though not enough to throw him off balance. For now, he could hover and move only stiffly, sliding a few inches at a time and turning at rigid right angles, not at all the fluid flight he imagined. Crunching footsteps approached. Loren stabilized himself and turned. Fleur Delacour stood beneath the beech tree in a pale blue robe, silver hair falling to her waist and her blue eyes flashing with a silvery light. She smiled and inclined her head. Fleur Delacour, Beauxbatons. Lauren Morgan, Hogwarts, Gryffindor. He glanced toward the lake. Most of the Patronus practice group had left, only Graves and Boot remained. I know you. Thank you for looking after Gabrielle. Her accent shifted slightly in longer sentences. Only older students came this time, and since I was chosen as champion, Gabrielle felt very lonely. I appreciate you asking Miss Weasley and Miss Lovegood to keep her company. You should thank Ron. Ron Weasley asked Ginny to look after her, Loren said. Fleur smiled but didn't press the point. Your control is quite exquisite, Mr. Morgan, combining levitation and summoning so smoothly. She hesitated, looking oddly introspective. My grandmother always said flying requires not only magic, but also feeling the call of the earth while being close to the sky. Can you fly? Loren asked bluntly. Fleur's expression went still. Not yet. And what's the point of saying that, then? He scoffed. Are you here for something? If not, I'm heading back to the castle. Fleur's smile tightened. After a moment, she chose her words carefully. I was wondering, what is your relationship with Madame Maxime? Loren's eyes flicked. None. I've never met her. Fleur studied him for a second, then lifted her skirts, bent at the knees, and gave him a graceful bow. I apologize for disturbing you, Mr. Morgan. Goodbye. Loren watched her leave, then shrugged and walked back to the castle. Better to practice inside the room of requirement in future, he thought. Had Nicholas mentioned him to Madame Maxime? Probably not. Back in the Great Hall, Ron was grinding his teeth. Hermione had done nothing to help him find a partner, and when he'd tried to tell a joke, she'd mocked him and whisked Harry and Ginny away. How infuriating. Who wouldn't want to invite a pretty girl who would say yes? If Loren wasn't handsome, would Hermione have been with him since first year? Ron chewed his donut aggressively and gulped down more pumpkin juice until the sweetness turned his stomach a little sour, each burp letting his irritation ease a touch. Hermione had called Harry and Ginny away. Were they actually becoming partners? Would Ron be the only one without a partner? His stomach made a protesting noise. Sister! He blurted suddenly. The little girl beside him jumped up and dashed toward the entrance. Ron followed her gaze and saw the radiant Vila hybrid witch kneel and embrace the child. Fleur's silver hair lifted without a breeze. Her blue eyes shone like reflected candlelight under the dome of the hall. She was beautiful, slender arms, long legs, a delicate waist. Seeing Fleur there, standing so close to Gabrielle, a daring idea lit up in Ron's mind. Password, my dear. Light of Wonderland. That's right, my dear. The fat lady smoothed the silver and gold ribbons in her hair, lowered her tremulous soprano, and swung the portrait frame open for Loren. He stepped through into the common room and immediately noticed Ron sitting in a far corner, looking pale and dazed. Hermione, Ginny, and Harry were clustered around him, speaking in low, comforting tones. It's all right, Ron. It's all right. Don't think about it. Whatever you do, don't think about it. Loren crossed the room and asked, curious, What's the matter, Ron? Ron looked up blankly for a moment before burying his face in his hands. I don't know how I could have done it. Why did I do that? Done what? Ron made no answer. Ginny patted his arm with a sympathetic smile that she could barely keep from cracking into laughter. She tried to sound consoling and only partly succeeded. He invited Fleur Delacour to the ball. Really brave, Ron. Very Gryffindor of you, Loren teased. Oh, don't remind me. I don't know what came over me. Ron groaned, pressing his face further into his palms. There were so many people, packed in the hall. I must have lost my mind. I saw her standing with Gabrielle, and they looked charming, and I just couldn't help myself. I went over and asked her. Loren turned to Hermione and Harry. What did she say? Harry shrugged. Hermione spread her hands, both indicating they hadn't seen. She didn't say anything, Ron mumbled. She just stood there looking at me like I was a sea cucumber. So what did you do? Loren pressed. What else could I do? I ran away as fast as I could. Ron's shoulders shook. I'm hopeless. I always just watch them from the back. That's because she has some Vila blood, Harry said with a smile, trying to be reassuring. Her grandmother was a Vila. Even dragons have trouble taking their eyes off her. It's not your fault. She probably had someone else under her charm, and you just happened to be in the way. Ron stopped whining and looked marginally less miserable. Then he looked up again with a glimmer of hope and asked, By the way, what are you two laughing at so much? Harry and Ginny exchanged a look, both a little sheepish. Ginny caught Harry's hand and, tilting her head, said proudly, We're going to the ball together. It was as if Ron had been struck. He gave a strangled sound and hid his face again. The next morning, the term officially ended and Hogwarts shifted into the Christmas break. In most years, only a handful of students stayed over for the holidays, but this year was different. Nearly everyone from fourth year up was staying. The ball was the talk of the castle, and even the heads of house had gathered their students for an unprecedented, if somewhat unexpected, dance lesson. The lesson was held in the Transfiguration classroom. Tables and chairs had been pushed back against the walls, leaving a wide space in the middle. On a low tea table in the center sat a purple, morning glory-shaped gramophone whose horn loomed almost as large as some of Hagrid's tools. Crookshanks and Madame Norris were dozing on the table, blinking lazily at the gathered students. The Christmas ball is a tradition, Professor McGonagall began. Her black robe was immaculate and her bun as neat as ever, but there was more humor in her voice than usual. Since the Triwizard Tournament was revived, we have held a ball on Christmas Eve. We and our guests gather in the Great Hall, and we are expected to be both graceful and composed. As the host school, I expect each of you to present your best selves. The Christmas ball is, fundamentally. She paused and a faint smile touched her lips. Dancing. Well, that's a surprise, isn't it? George called, and a ripple of laughter ran through the students. Loren leaned toward Hermione and whispered, I was half tempted to see how Professor Snape would teach dancing and potions. Hermione pictured Snape's sullen face and let out a small laugh, earning a sharp look from McGonagall. Quiet. McGonagall's voice smoothed the chatter. Gryffindor has held its place in the wizarding world for nearly 1,000 years. I will not have you bringing its name into disrepute overnight. Do not chatter, leap about, or make spectacles of yourselves at the ball. She softened then, speaking almost as if in a story. Dancing is about making the body nimble. In every girl's heart sleeps a swan, longing to spread its wings. In every boy's heart, a lion ready to leap. Mr. Weasley, she called. Ron looked up, startled, and met the gaze of both Fred and George, who were trying very hard not to grin. Would you come up here, please? McGonagall asked. Now, place your right hand on my waist. Filch, music, please. Blushing and bewildered, Ron stumbled forward and took his place as McGonagall instructed. For a moment he wondered aloud, not to anyone in particular, why he seemed to be playing the woman's part. Before he could puzzle that out, McGonagall began to lead him through the steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, she counted crisply. Children, everyone join in. As the students hesitated, Loren reached for the girl beside him. Miss Granger, may I have this dance? Hermione tolerated the teasing glances from their roommates and lifted a smile. She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, her slight shyness folding into the smile. Your dancing has improved a great deal since the summer. She murmured close enough that he could hear the warmth in her voice. What, have you been practicing in secret? No practice seems necessary. You're a natural." He managed a small, pleased laugh. The old gramophone's horn warmed to life. Soft, bright violins bowed, and the mellow tones of French horns steadied the rhythm. The music drifted out through the castle windows and into the cottony winter sky. Outside, the distant wail of a train whistle signaled the Hogwarts Express pulling away. Red carriages receding into the snowy landscape, a mist of steam curling back, and the younger students watching with a twinge of envy as their friends settled in for a holiday that promised music, dancing, and perhaps a little magic. 474. Christmas Eve. Although the professors had piled a mountain of homework on the fourth years for the holidays, the younger students paid it little mind once term ended. The little wizards gathered to play their hearts out. Gryffindor Tower was nearly as lively as it had been before the break. Laughter and noise never ceased in the common room, running late into the night every day. Harry darted around with the golden egg, insisting the common room was far too loud to hear its cries. Fred and George's canary creams sold like hotcakes, and every so often, someone would suddenly sprout feathers. The Gryffindors learned fast to be suspicious of food offered by others. No one wanted a surprise canary cream. The Weasley twins were, as usual, nowhere to be found. According to Lee Jordan, they were working on a new product. As the Yule Ball approached, some of the little wizards grew anxious about partners. A curious trend had spread through Hogwarts, especially in Slytherin. Students took pride in bringing dates from other schools. Ron finally found a partner, too. He had meant to ask Parvati Patil, widely regarded as one of the prettiest girls in Gryffindor, but found that the Patil twins had already been claimed by Seamus and Dean. At Parvati's suggestion, he had invited her roommate, Lavender Brown. Saturday, December 24th, 1994. That morning, the castle woke to brand new decorations. The professors were determined to have Hogwarts looking its best for Christmas. Marble stair railings were hung with icicles that never melted. The 12 trees that usually filled the Great Hall glittered with every kind of trinket, from sparkling hollyberries to a few very chatty golden owls. The suits of armor had been enchanted to sing carols whenever someone passed. From one empty helmet came an off-key, "Oh, come, all ye faithful," that sounded more comical than reverent. Creak. The wooden door of the hospital wing eased open. A girl peered out, her clever eyes darting around. After making sure no one was near, she slipped out cautiously. "Miss Granger, this is a one-time exception. Do not make a habit of it," said Madame Pomfrey from behind the door. "All right, Madame Pomfrey, thank you," Hermione replied, closing the door and turning back toward Gryffindor Tower. She couldn't quite hide a smile, but tried to keep her lips pressed into a thin line. Rounding a corner, she almost bumped into a broad-shouldered figure in heavy leather, Victor Krum, the Durmstrang champion. He stood on the stair landing alone, with a slightly gloomy, even awkward expression, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. It was strange to see him without his usual cluster of admirers. Normally, he could never move without a pack of enthusiastic fans around him. Hermione nodded politely and slipped past him, walking up the stairs quickly. He called after her in a low voice, "Hermione." She didn't stop, climbing 2 steps at a time, and hurried on. 1, 2, 3, da-da-da. In the boys' dormitory, Neville, already dressed, repeated clumsy dance steps in front of the full-length mirror. He had grown thinner and rangy. His fitted white shirt and loose black dress pants made him look more spirited than usual. Loren, Harry, and Seamus lounged on the bed, dressed similarly and munching from a packet of sweets as they watched. "Neville, you're doing brilliantly," Seamus said. "Why don't you take a break?" "I'm worried I'll step on Hannah's dress," Neville fretted. "You could bring a remembrall," Loren suggested. "Hannah would chuck that in a second." They all laughed. At that moment, there was a crash from the changing room as Ron emerged in a light gray suit, looking awkward and nervous. "How do I look? Does it look ridiculous?" "It's not ridiculous. Very smart." Harry tossed him a chocolate frog. "Trust me, Ronald Weasley, all dressed up, very handsome." Seamus grinned. "Be confident. You'll be top of the dance floor tonight." Ron sighed. "I'll believe half of that." He eased onto the bed with stiff, awkward movements and nibbled on his chocolate frog. Loren regarded him and raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to go practice with Neville?" "No need," Ron said faintly. Lavender and I have been practicing for days. If I spent as much time on homework as I have on dancing, I might even catch up with you lot." "So you think Lavender's all right then?" Harry asked. "Well, at first I didn't think she was that pretty, but I'm not exactly a looker myself." Ron trailed off. "Oh, my Ronnie, his eyebrows, his eyes, his nose, even the freckles. He's perfect." Lavender cooed in the girls' dormitory, hands to her heart and her voice sugary enough to make her roommates shiver. Parvati rolled her eyes and turned back to Hermione, peering at her teeth. "How have I never noticed how pretty you are, Hermione? It's obviously just a little adjustment to your front teeth," Parvati declared. Hermione beamed. Madame Pomfrey finally agreed after a lot of begging. She held a mirror and cast a tiny charm. "She told me to say when they were right." She laughed. "My parents are going to complain when I go home. My mum says magic shouldn't fix teeth. You should get braces." Lavender and Parvati didn't fully follow the last bit, but they were used to not understanding everything Hermione said. Lavender patted the bed and urged, "Hurry up and put on your dress. We're the last ones." Before Hermione could answer, a neat house elf in a tidy dress appeared in the doorway. Twinkle held 2 boxes from Twillifit and Tattings in her hands and said in a high voice, "I'm sorry, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall wouldn't allow the pumpkin carriage into the castle, so Twinkle had to bring your dresses herself." Heavy snow drifted down from the eaves and windows, settling on the gray bricks and stone walls. Beauxbaton's pale blue carriage stood on the grounds like a frosted pumpkin, and nearby Hagrid's hut looked like a sugar-dusted gingerbread house. Ilvermorny's school bus was buried beneath a mound of snow, and Durmstrang's great ship bore a skin of ice along its gunwales and rigging, the frost giving the ropes and railings a crystalline sheen. As Christmas carols rose and dusk fell, the castle lit up with warm amber light. Loren, Harry, Ron, Neville, and Seamus changed into their dress robes in the dormitory and went down to the common room, feeling a little awkward. Fortunately, no one seemed to notice. The room had lost its usual uniformity of house robes and instead gleamed with colorful evening wear. Harry immediately spotted Ginny in the crowd. She had chosen an elegant gown of velvet and satin, the skirt a deep, verdant green, the bodice trimmed with velvet like plum frost, and even standing still, she drew attention. Their eyes met and both flushed. They looked away, then found themselves looking back. Loren smiled at their furtive glances. The others found their dates quickly. "Merry Christmas, handsome boys," Parvati said with a smile. She wore pink, her dark hair was braided with gold thread. "You too, Parvati. Beautiful tonight," Seamus replied, awkwardly smiling. "Thank you," Parvati said, glancing at Loren. "You'll probably have to wait a little longer, Loren. Hermione's still not done with her hair." Lavender stood beside Ron, hands clasped tightly. If someone had given her 2 dresses, she would have begged Professor McGonagall to transfigure her appearance entirely. Loren smiled and nodded. "Then you 2 go on ahead." "See you later," they called. The students drifted away in 2s and 3s until the common room fell quiet. George and Fred lingered last, winking playfully. Loren waved them off. Just as the portrait hole was closing, footsteps sounded on the wooden stair. Loren straightened on the sofa, adjusted his bow tie, and looked up. A figure descended slowly. Her hair, no longer mussed, was sleek and pinned into an elegant bun. Candlelight spilled from the dome above, catching the delicate curl of her lashes and making her eyes shine. She paused when she saw him. For a moment their gazes met and both seemed to sparkle. He smiled. Hermione smiled back, and the line at her mouth softened. Loren took a step forward and peered. "Hey, your front teeth look smaller. I almost didn't recognize you." Hermione's smile vanished, and she punched him. Then, when he grinned and took her hand, smiled again. "How do you like the dress?" she asked. "I prefer the fuchsia gradient one," he teased. "Hey, I remember. I told you on your birthday. One for what you like, and one for what I like. One to please you, one to please me." Hermione repeated the line and punched him once more, laughing. In the portrait hole, the fat lady and Violet sat together in the frame, both slightly tipsy, several empty boxes of chocolate liqueurs discarded at their feet. Outside, the castle gates had been transformed into a grotto. Hundreds of fairies glittered among conjured rose bushes, beating translucent wings and scattering tiny sparks of light. Professor McGonagall stood at the entrance in a red woolen robe. A somewhat ungainly thistle wreath sat on the brim of her hat. She checked the clock, then called in a deep voice, "Champions, this way, please." Under hundreds of eyes, Harry and Ginny stepped forward, arm in arm. Both looked nervous. Their linked arms were almost rigid. Fleur Delacour glided in beside her partner, Roger Davies, in a silver-gray satin robe that made her look breathtaking. Roger wore a dazed, grateful air as if he could hardly believe his luck. Pickery Greaves appeared in a dark green silk robe with a high collar, accompanied by a witch named Boot. Cedric and Cho stood together, smiling with gentle courtesy. Victor Krum, as ever, looked massive and solemn. His Durmstrang partner was a sturdy girl who laughed heartily, paying no heed to the jealous stares of admirers. Loren and Hermione arrived just before the ball began and slipped into the Gryffindor line, thinking their entrance quiet and unobtrusive. The surrounding students thought otherwise. How could such a dazzling pair go unnoticed? Hermione's gown alone would have stopped people in their tracks. It was made from dozens of meters of gold silk organza, soft yet structured. The skirt had been cut and pressed into petal-like pleats, and golden leaf patterns studded with crystals caught every flicker of light. Candlelight from the walls and starlight from the enchanted ceiling made her appear to shimmer. Parvati clutched Seamus's arm and whispered, "Hermione should be at the front. She outshines Miss Delacour." Her twin Padma nodded, eyes darting too at the boy beside her. Lauren's mid-length black tailcoat was slightly open to reveal a snow-white shirt with a pointed collar, a neat bow tie, and a black satin waistcoat, simple and impeccable. Hermione's good taste had been evident long before. She had found Loren in their first year and chosen well. She smiled. Her eyes shone with something like light. Loren mirrored the smile, bright and genuine. Inside the great hall, the walls were dusted with silvery frost. The ceiling showed a starry night. Hundreds of mistletoe sprigs and ivy wreaths hung from above. The 4 long house tables had been removed and replaced by 100 small tables, each lit by a lantern. When everyone sat, the gold-rimmed plates in front of them were still empty. Each guest found a small menu at their place. The visiting students from other schools looked around uncertainly until Dumbledore chuckled and called for a pork chop to appear on his plate. With each call, abundant dishes began to materialize, and the warm, mouth-watering scents of stews and mushroom soup spread through the hall. 476. Miss Granger strikes out at the high table. The professors sat lost in their own thoughts. Hagrid, in a brown suit, waved cheerfully. Madame Maxime returned the gesture, her opal jewelry flashing. Crouch and Moody ate in companionable silence, while Karkaroff regarded Snape with a look that was hard to read. "Durmstrang's castle is 4 stories high. Only fire can be lit by magic," someone said. "At Beauxbatons, we fill the halls with ice sculptures at Christmas that never melt, like diamonds," another replied. "Ilvermorny's castle sits on a high mountain, usually wrapped in fog, with 4 great statues guarding the gate," a third offered. "No one can claim to know all of Hogwarts' secrets," another voice said. "Beyond the prankish staircases and that chamber of secrets, there are rumors of a very luxurious lavatory hidden in the castle." Pairs of students from different schools traded similar boasts and comparisons. Under the enchanted ceiling, with stars wheel-ing overhead, the conversation took on the sudden, competitive energy of people showing off at a party. Loren felt amused and a little bemused by it all. "Here, open your mouth," he said to his partner, offering her a slice of Hungarian goulash. She obeyed, and the sight of her swallowing gave him a small, private satisfaction. Hermione, still getting used to her new teeth, chewed with puffed cheeks. "Try this too," he urged, and this, one more. Open." Hermione's lips pressed together. Her bright eyes held a helpless look. "If I eat any more, the corset of my dress will come undone," she said. "All right." Loren, a little disappointed, scraped the remaining food onto his own plate. Many of the younger guests had already eaten and were turning their attention toward the high table. Dumbledore stood, cleared his throat, and proclaimed with glittering excitement, "I know everyone cannot wait. As the book says, the highlight of the ball is dancing," George and Fred called out together. "Then let us begin." Dumbledore waved his wand. Instantly, the tables rose and slid to the walls, clearing the center of the hall. A stage pushed up near the stonework, revealing a drum kit, several guitars, a lute, a cello, and some organs. The weird sisters, hair wild and robes deliberately shredded, took their places. They were a sensation on Wizarding Wireless, and rumor had it had even toured the Muggle world. Loren watched, amused by how Muggle their rock clothes looked and, oddly, familiar. Lanterns around the tables dimmed, focusing light on the dance floor. A gentle waltz began. The 5 champions and their partners rose and stepped into the clearing. Harry almost tripped on his robes, but steadied himself. With Ginny leading him, he loosened up and began to move with more confidence. Crumb remained stiff as a board, but the others performed well, Fleur in particular drawing admiring glances. Before the first dance had ended, the professors themselves had taken to the floor, and the champions were no longer the center of attention. Dumbledore twirled under Madame Maxime's hand. Hagrid looked wistfully from the high table, regretting that he had hesitated and missed the chance to be asked first. The faculty displayed an irrepressible variety of steps. Flitwick spun around Sprout's skirts like a dancing elf. Ludo Bagman and McGonagall waltzed amiably, and Professor Sinistra edged nervously away from Moody's wooden leg. Watching the professors dance with such ease, the younger students' shyness melted. Neville's awkward steps made Hannah giggle. Ron couldn't quite catch Lavender's rhythm. Seamus and Dean found themselves alternately dancing with the Patil twins. Draco, holding Astoria, was warmed by her bright smile. Skirts and tailcoats flew as the music sped up and the atmosphere rose toward a joyful peak. Loren bowed, one hand behind his back, the other extended in a gentlemanly invitation. His voice was gentle, his tone hiding an unmistakable happiness. "May I have this dance, Miss Granger?" "I'd be delighted." In the dim seating area, Hermione's eyes caught the light and shone. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the illumination brightened, setting off the gold embroidery beneath her gown. Loren looked at her with something like awe. Hermione let her head and neck hold the pose of someone both proud and vulnerable. Her eyes glistened. His hands settled at the small of her back. He felt the soft rise and fall of her breath and smelled the faint, pleasant scent of her perfume. The music shifted to a slower, more intimate piece. Drums faded, guitars quieted, and the violins and organs sank into a warm, sustaining harmony. They spun and swayed in time. Hermione seemed to find the rest of the world falling away. "Last week," she said softly, leaning close, "when I asked you about formal dress, you quoted Pushkin, 'If life deceives you.'" "I only said it to tease you," Loren murmured in her ear. His breath warmed her skin, and she shivered in the pleasant way of someone whose defenses had been disarmed. "I thought of a poem, too," Hermione went on, hesitating the slightest moment, "to tease you back." "Recite it," he urged. She spoke, her voice low and steady, the kind of clear recitation that recalled schoolroom lessons. The poem she chose, translated perhaps, and altered in places, sounded in the hush of the dance like a private thing. "Despairing sorrow troubles me greatly. The ordinary toil of the world makes me restless and worn. Then you appeared before my eyes. I remember that wondrous moment, like a fleeting phantom, like a pure celestial beauty. That gentle voice still lingers in my ears. That lovely face soothes my dreams." As the music thinned to the pure tones of the violins, the couple moved with a softness that matched the lines. Hermione recited as if she had been called on to explain Gamp's law in Transfiguration, precise and clear. Loren did not know the poem, foreign and unfamiliar as it was to him, but each line built quietly within him until something warm and uncontainable rose. Hermione thought of how, even at a school of magic, loneliness could feel the same as ever, ostracism that once blinded her to any comfort. But then Loren had appeared, and meeting him at Hogwarts felt like grace. She pictured the sycamore tree from the story she loved, the two of them planting a tree, tending it together, and years later climbing its branches to watch a shared sunrise. In that image, he was a living rainbow in her life. "Miss Granger just dealt a critical hit," Loren said, laughing softly at his own impulse. She smiled, freed from reserve. She let go of his waist and hands, stepped a little closer, lifted her face, rose onto her toes, and kissed him. Loren's senses felt amplified, as if magic had turned every nerve into a fine instrument. The faint, sweet taste of wine lingered between their lips. He held her tighter and tighter, nearly kneading her into his chest, feeling her slight body grow limp as if melting into a puddle. Her hands around his neck relaxed from stiff to soft. When the song ended, they slowly pulled apart. Loren looked into Hermione's shimmering eyes, rested his chin on her forehead, and felt a certainty settle over him. This was not their first kiss, nor would it be their last. Decades from now, he knew he would still remember this one. "Hermione?" he whispered. She answered. "Still want to dance? I want to rest for a bit? Back to our seats for some food?" Hermione shook her head. Her ears twitched slightly. "Let's go outside for some fresh air." "As you wish." Loren took her hand and left the dance floor. They passed through the rows of tables and out into the courtyard, where a cold wind brought crisp, clean air. The front doors were open. Below the steps, a rose garden spread, edged by low hedges and winding paths, dotted with large stone statues and fairy lights. A magic fountain tumbled quietly nearby. "I hollowed out the biggest pumpkin from Hagrid's patch and made a pumpkin carriage to pick you up," Loren said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Dobby told me." Hermione smiled. "Professor McGonagall forbade pumpkin carriages from entering the castle." "That's not in the school rules." Loren pretended to glare. "It is. It forbids bringing privately owned large magical equipment onto the grounds." "Whose side are you on?" Loren asked, mock indignant. Hermione didn't answer. She looked up and smiled so brightly that moonlight seemed to settle on her lashes and the curve of her mouth. For a moment, Loren was transfixed. They stepped out of the path into an open stretch of garden. The heavy snow that had fallen for days had finally stopped. A crescent moon hung in the clear sky, silver and cold, lengthening their shadows across the white ground. "Between the moonlight and the snow," Loren murmured. "What? I thought of a poem." "Then recite it." "I say, Miss Hermione Granger." He bent his head and smiled. "I like you." "Poem, my foot." Loren's inner scorn vanished as he drew her closer and kissed her again. The wine's faint sweetness still clung to them, making the world a shade softer and a little headier. Lights twinkled, roses seemed to bloom in secret, and for a time, nothing else existed but the two of them. Back in the Great Hall, Harry and Ginny were still on the dance floor. "Ginny, shall we sit down?" Harry panted. "But this song is so good," Ginny protested. "Then, one more." Harry tried to smile through aching limbs. They danced on. Everyone else took a breather after a while, but Ginny had kept him moving through a dozen songs. His legs were sore, his feet heavy. When he finally stepped off the floor, he felt as if he were walking on clouds. Harry flopped into a chair beside Ron, propping some of his weight on Ginny. "I can't anymore," he said, waving a hand. "Even if this song praises Dumbledore, I need to rest." "Oh, all right." Ginny feigned disappointment, but couldn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. She'd sworn to herself to get at least a dozen more dances in before the night ended. They slipped away from the bustle, carefully skirting the wildly enthusiastic waltz Hagrid and Madame Maxime were performing. People were scattering to avoid being swept away by it. Harry sank down next to Ron, who handed him a bottle of butterbeer. Ginny and Lavender exchanged a quick look and drifted off to chat nearby. "How was it, dancing with my sister?" Ron asked, half teasing. "Ginny's great," Harry said with a tired grin. "Just exhausting." "Nonsense, you clearly had fun." Harry glanced around. "Where are Loren and Hermione? I haven't seen them." "They went out ages ago," Ron shrugged. "Wise choice." Harry let his eyes sweep the hall, a little puzzled. Nearby, Fleur Delacour had refused yet another dance invitation and was sitting beside Roger Davies. She watched the table where Ron and Harry sat and asked, "The red-haired one next to Harry Potter, is he Ron Weasley?" "That's him," Roger replied. "What's he like?" "Average talent, average grades," Roger said with a dismissive wave. "He got attention at the end-of-year feast once, but that was because of Harry Potter. Nothing really remarkable about him." Roger had barely finished when Fleur rose without waiting. As the Beauxbatons champion and the most admired witch in the hall, she drew many eyes as she crossed the room. Harry and Ron watched, frozen for a moment, as she approached. "Merry Christmas, Harry, Ginny." Fleur's voice was soft. "Thank you for looking after Gabrielle." "Merry Christmas, Miss Delacour," Harry answered politely. "You're welcome. Gabrielle and I are friends," Ginny replied, a little stiffly, her guard up. Ron's face went hot. Memories from that day, his foolishness and the way things had gone wrong, rose up, and he wished the floor would swallow him. Fleur smiled at him. Ron Weasley, she said. I had intended to accept your invitation that day, but you left before I could reply. Ah. Ron's mouth went dry. He stared, stunned and unable to believe his ears. To thank you for looking after Gabrielle, Ron Weasley, may I have this dance? Fleur extended her hand, pale and luminous. Ron took it as if it were a lifeline, his legs barely steady as he rose. Fleur led him onto the dance floor. Boys watched with envy, and a few with barely concealed malice. Ron's heart thudded so hard he felt it in his throat. His hands and feet trembled, but only one thought steadied him. Long live Loren Morgan. The silver frost on the castle walls caught the bright lights as the weird sisters played a slow number. Wizards and witches on the dance floor moved with smiling concentration, making sure their steps were perfect while keeping one eye on their partners. Seamus, Dean, and the Patils had just finished a dance and were now sitting at a round table, resting and chatting. We could have spun a little faster just now, Dean said earnestly. Made your skirts swirl up. That would have been lovely, Padma, don't you think? Seamus rubbed his eyes, staring in disbelief. I must be drunk, Dean. Tell me I'm not seeing things. You get drunk on pumpkin juice, Dean started, then stopped as his gaze found a pair on the dance floor. His words died in his throat, his expression went blank. Swaying with the music, Fleur watched the red-headed boy's eyes dart around. When they met hers, he looked like a startled rabbit, flustered, shy, almost comic. She couldn't help smiling. Ron, she said lightly, I may call you that, can I? Ron nodded so vigorously his face went red. Oh, yes, of course. Fleur smiled and spoke warmly. Thank you for looking after Gabrielle these past few days. It was a great help. You're welcome, Ron said with a goofy grin. It was Loren's idea at first, but Ginny and Luna ended up accompanying her most of the time. He felt like his head was swimming. He had pictured this 1,000 times, at the center of attention, standing beside the prettiest girl in the room. But now, aside from a few friendly looks from Seamus and Dean that made him comfortable, most of the stares felt like blades. Fleur was beautiful, his heart thudded, but the attention made him awkward. Fleur chatted casually about everything and nothing. The mischievous stares, the greasy food in the kitchens, England's cold weather. Yes, exactly. That's what I think too, Ron said, grinning helplessly. As the song wound down, Fleur's brow creased and she sighed. It's my fault. I've been too absorbed with the golden egg. I haven't a clue what it means, and I can't even be with Gabrielle. The other champions have surely left me behind. It's all right. Harry hasn't a clue either, Ron offered, then realized who he was talking to, and the smile faded. The music stopped and everyone returned to their tables. Harry handed him a butterbeer and teased. So, how was it to dance with the famous Fleur Delacour? Ron was quiet for a moment. Miss Delacour is very kind. It's just not exactly relaxing. You boys do go for that type, Lavender sniffed. Who wouldn't? Ron downed the butterbeer, burped and grinned. But I know she doesn't like me. Come on, let's go dance again. Lavender's eyes lit up at that. Outside, past the courtyard path, the roses were edged in snow, and the fairy lights looked fragile in the cold. Professor McGonagall had worked hard to keep the courtyard warm for the ball, but Loren and Hermione had retreated to the less crowded area and found it chilly, enough that their lips were a little swollen and their tongues slightly numb. Both were self-controlled, so they forced themselves to stop kissing. Hermione looked up at Loren, puzzled. Hadn't she been taller last year? How had that changed? Loren couldn't bear to stare too long. His eyes were full of stars. He tightened his arm around her waist and through the smooth silk of her dress felt the warmth of her body. He leaned his head, nuzzled between her shoulder and neck, and breathed in. Hermione made a small approving sound. Loren pressed his nose against her. Are you cold, Hermione? No, it's snowing. He squeezed her hand and felt how icy her arm was. Strange, her mouth had been so warm earlier. This is not cold, he asked. It really isn't, Hermione said with a small, serious face and a faint voice. Even if you're cold, let's go back to the Great Hall. Oh, after hours of dancing in the Great Hall, many couples slipped out to find quieter spots. The Rose Garden's fairy lights still twinkled. Stone sculptures and hedges created small private alcoves, and the fountain's gentle murmur covered soft whispers. It was, in short, an ideal place for a date. Loren and Hermione walked softly along the paths, avoiding rustling flower beds and low-slung statues, slowly making their way toward the Great Hall. On one path, they passed several familiar faces, some Ravenclaws, some Hufflepuffs, but no Gryffindors yet. As they passed a large reindeer statue, a rough, familiar voice came from behind them. "From the moment I laid eyes on you, I knew." They turned to see Hagrid and Madame Maxime. Loren and Hermione exchanged a look, then ducked into some nearby bushes to listen. "What did you know, Hagrid?" Madame Maxime asked coldly. "What do you mean? I knew you were like me. Did you get it from your father or your mother?" Hagrid asked, gazing at the silvery fountain. Madame Maxime bristled. "I don't know what you're talking about, Hagrid." Hagrid sighed. "My mother was one of the few left in Britain. I don't remember her much. She left when I was 3. They don't have motherly instincts, do they? I don't know what happened to her. She's probably gone." He blew his nose hard. "My dad raised me. He was a short man. When I was 6, I could pick him up and set him on the wardrobe, but he never got mad. He always laughed. Then he died before I even started at school." Madame Maxime's voice was ice. "I don't understand what you mean," Hagrid persisted. "And you, which side did you take after?" Madame Maxime answered with outrage. "How dare you? Half-giant indeed. I have never been so insulted. I have a large frame, that's all." Her words cut through the chilly night. Madame Maxime stormed off, sweeping flower beds aside and sending startled fairies fluttering into the air. Couples nearby turned and scattered. Hagrid sat silently on a bench, watching her retreat. After a few minutes, he stood and walked off in the opposite direction, not back to the castle, but toward his hut in the Forbidden Forest. The Christmas ball ran past midnight. After dancing for hours, the students were exhausted and exhilarated. A few hoped to keep the party going in the Gryffindor common room, but most lacked the energy. At the foot of the portrait staircase, Loren held Hermione's hand, unable to look away. This version of her, hair undone, a jacket thrown over her shoulders, had a different, more intimate charm than the formal gown had. "It's time to say goodnight, Loren." Hermione's lashes fluttered in the firelight. The smoothing potion's effect had partly worn off, and her brown hair fell loosely. Loren's jacket hung across her. "Oh, good night. Don't forget to tell Harry and Ron about Hagrid." "Oh." He could feel Hermione's gaze burning into him. If she said any more, he might never leave. He kissed her quickly, waved, and she hurried up to the dormitory to change, wash, and try to scrub the lipstick and the slick potion out of her hair. The lipstick seemed stubbornly persistent. She peered at her slightly swollen lips in the mirror and blushed again. "Does this mean it's official?" she wondered. "I should write to Mum." She crept back to her bed, trying to avoid her roommate's curious looks, produced Muggle stationery and a ballpoint, and sat to write. Parvati and Lavender chatted on, tired but awake, grumbling about Fleur's airs. But not all men fell for her, they said, not even little Ronnie. In the boys' dormitory, Loren washed, changed, and got into bed. He didn't know why his bed seemed hotter than usual for no reason, maybe because his mind was still restless. He lay on his 4-poster, grin spreading unconsciously, thinking of Hermione's earlier request. He drifted off, cheeks warm. The next morning, everyone rose late. The common room was subdued. Conversations were interrupted by yawns. Hermione's hair was once more untidy. She admitted she had used the smoothing potion only for the ball and didn't want the bother daily. At a round table, she stroked Crookshanks, ate a cashew, and looked content. "Harry, you mean Cedric actually left you a clue about the golden egg at the Great Hall entrance?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. "He said it was to repay me for telling him about the dragons. At the end of the ball, he told Ron to leave first, then told me to take the egg and go have a bath and think about it in hot water." "That's his clue?" Hermione frowned. "A bath? Not a riddle, just a bath," Harry said. "In the prefect's bathroom on the 6th floor. He even told me how to get in. The 4th door to the left of the statue of Boris the Bewildered. Password fresh pineapple." Loren looked up. "Prefect's bathroom." Hermione fell quiet, thinking of nearly headless Nick and the ghosts. Crookshanks butted her hand impatiently. "It's odd advice," she said. "Why would a bath explain a screaming golden egg? He might be playing a trick." Harry was as puzzled as anyone. He turned to Loren. "Didn't you also have a clue about the egg? What did you find out?" "My advice is to protect your privacy," Loren said, feeding Hermione another cashew, and slipping his hand under the table to hold hers. Hermione's lips brushed his finger. Her cheeks warmed. At the center of the room, Ron was retelling his dance with Fleur for the 7th time, making sure Fred and George had every detail. When he flopped back down at the window table, he took another deep gulp of pumpkin juice. "What are you lot on about? We were talking about Harry's egg, but we'll wait until after he's had a bath," Loren said, then added casually, "I want to bring up Hagrid." "Hagrid?" Ron scratched his head. "What about him?" "When we passed through the courtyard, we overheard Hagrid and Madame Maxime," Hermione said, and then she told them everything they'd heard. Hagrid's claim to be partly giant, his comment about Madame Maxime, and how the conversation ended in an argument. "Hagrid's a half-giant?" Ron snorted. "I thought he'd been hit by an engorgement charm when he was little. No wonder Madame Maxime came back from the garden looking horrid, gloomier than Snape." "What's wrong with giants?" Harry said indignantly. "Hagrid's not like that. I don't see why Madame Maxime acts all high and mighty. If Hagrid's a half-giant, then she must be too. She's not just large, she's enormous." "Actually, Harry, giants are a problem," Ron said more quietly, looking around. "Someone like Madame Maxime can't be seen with them. Giants are supposedly violent, born to kill, even kill each other. There aren't any left in Britain." "Where'd they go?" Harry asked. "Who knows?" Ron shrugged. "Maybe they died out. Some might still live in mountains abroad." Hermione chipped in from her reading. "It was mentioned in Britain, the evolution of humanoids. During the last war, the last dozen or so giants in Britain sided with Voldemort. They were involved in some of the worst attacks on Muggles, and Aurors during the war killed many of them. After that, people decided giants were cruel and bloodthirsty." "But Hagrid isn't like that," Harry protested. "We don't get to decide," Loren said, "but Madame Maxime certainly does." Harry stared for a few seconds, thoughtful and then determined. Then, "Shall we go see Hagrid?" The fairies in the courtyard were gone, but the rose bushes and the enchanted fountain remained, and it was easy to imagine students turning the place into a dating sanctuary until the roses withered. As they passed the reindeer statue, they found an unexpected figure sitting on a stone bench. "Headmaster Dumbledore!" Harry exclaimed. "Good morning, Harry, Ron, Loren, and Hermione." Dumbledore, wrapped in his beige robes, looked down at them with a smile. He held a sheet of parchment out toward Harry. "You're going to see Hagrid, aren't you?" "Yes." Harry nodded, surprised that the headmaster knew their destination. A bright blue light flashed in Dumbledore's eyes as he handed the parchment to Harry. Before anyone could speak, Dumbledore waved and started back toward the castle, leaving a languid voice behind him. "Goodbye, dears. Last night's dance was wonderful. Pardon an old man, I need to catch up on my sleep." Loren watched him go and blinked. He had always had the feeling the old headmaster avoided him. Whether it was just imagination or not, he couldn't say. When had it started? Maybe around the time Moody turned out to be an imposter. Hermione, who did not like reading other people's mail, nevertheless glanced at the open parchment. Her expression hardened. "You have to see this," she whispered. They gathered around and read what Dumbledore had asked them to deliver. The parchment looked like a news article rather than a private letter. The byline made them tense before they read a single word: Rita Skeeter. Rubius Hagrid admits he was expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year and has served as the school's gamekeeper ever since, a job Dumbledore found for him. Last year, Hagrid used mysterious influence on the headmaster to win a post as Professor of Care of Magical Creatures over more qualified candidates. Hagrid is a large, rough-looking man who abuses his position, bringing terrifying beasts into his classes and endangering his students. In a series of nearly disastrous lessons, Hagrid has caused multiple injuries, and Dumbledore's response is alarmingly ambiguous. Investigations indicate Hagrid is breeding a creature he calls a blast-ended scroot, a dangerous hybrid between a manticore and a fire crab. Hagrid is not a pure-blood wizard, nor even a pure-blood human. Exclusive, his mother is the giant Fridwolfa, currently unaccounted for. As always, Rita used a few facts to provoke a lot of feeling. Her prose was sharp and insinuating, more like a Muggle tabloid than proper reporting. Loren's eyes slid over the lines and the name at the bottom. He remembered meeting Rita in New York over the summer and again during the Triwizard Tournament. She'd even tried to interview the champions before the first task. Her reports on Harry, while still slanted, had been better recently. He hadn't expected this from her right after Christmas. "How did she find out?" Harry breathed. "She probably turned into a beetle and eavesdropped in someone's flower bed," Hermione snapped, glaring at the stone statue as if it were Rita. The parchment trembled in her fingers. Loren turned it over. There was nothing on the back. It was simply an article. "Don't worry too much," said Ron. "If Skeeter had actually published it, we'd have seen it in the Prophet this morning." "Then what is this?" Harry asked. "It's her correspondence with Dumbledore," Loren said. "Whether the headmaster intercepted it or Rita sent it to him on purpose, it's not meant for publication right now." He folded the paper and slipped it into his robe pocket. "Let's go see Hagrid." "Hagrid's going to be upset when he sees this," Hermione murmured. They wound through the rose garden, past the fountain, and into a world of fresh snow. Dumbledore, watching from behind a castle pillar, smiled briefly as their figures receded, and then his smile faded. Even children could see some things plainly. Why did so many adults fail to see them? He thought about Fridwolfa and about his gamekeeper, Rubeus Hagrid, who had known loneliness and therefore tended creatures and abandoned things with particular tenderness. Hagrid's compassion had won him friends. He would not be without support. Dumbledore turned back to the castle and climbed the stairs to his office. There, a long-expected visitor sat in the guest chair, Rita Skeeter. She tapped the rim of her coffee cup with a manicured thumb as he entered. "Apologies for the delay, Miss Skeeter," Dumbledore said, smiling. "The snow slowed me a trifle." Rita offered him the cup with a sharp, bright smile. "Not at all. I brewed this especially. Would you care to try it, Headmaster?" "My pleasure." Dumbledore brought the cup to his nose and praised its rich aroma. Rita explained, in an almost bored aside, that she'd learned the blend in New York. "Muggle methods are tedious," she said, "but a wand helps." She also mentioned she had seen something interesting on his bookshelf, her own article from the International Confederation of Wizards conference. Before she could go further, Dumbledore began to cough violently. Rita leapt up, alarmed, but he waved her down. After a moment, he composed himself, gently pushing the coffee away. "Perhaps the hospital wing?" Rita asked. "It was nothing," he said, dabbing his mouth and moving the cup aside. "Let us return to business." Rita watched him for a beat, still wary, then went on. "The draft I left should show my sincerity. I'm here for one answer." "To what?" "Was your warning at the International Confederation of Wizards conference true?" Dumbledore met her gaze. Many clever people had dismissed his warnings as humor. Only someone like Rita had come to request confirmation. "Rita," he said gently, "if you seek sensationalism, you know who is not your subject, and you know why." "I don't lack for stories," she replied. "I ask to avoid danger. Beetles can sense weather changes in Muggle articles. I want to be prepared." She took another sip of coffee. Dumbledore watched her, then leaned forward. "I will continue to provide warnings," he said, "but in return, I need you to help me. There are intelligent communities beyond the Ministry's reach. I need you to go to their hidden settlements. Giants, vampires, curapiras, goblins, sirens." Steam curled from a delicate silver pot on the desk as the two negotiated until Rita had finished a pot of coffee and the agreement was sealed. She rose, gave a practiced bow, and clicked away in bright red heels. When her footsteps faded, Dumbledore sat back, tapped his fingers on the desk in thought, glanced at her empty cup and teapot, and allowed himself a small, quiet chuckle. Outside again, snow fell and everyone's breath turned to mist. The path was slippery and the cold felt like a slap. Loren, feeling numb from the wind, cast a bubblehead charm over himself and Hermione. Ron looked at the two of them, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, and winced. "Hey, what about ours?" he demanded. "You don't know the bubblehead charm?" Loren replied without turning back. "Ours doesn't hold up as well as yours," Harry said, self-satisfied. "You'll have to practice more." Loren tightened his hold around Hermione to keep her from slipping, one arm around her shoulder, the other holding her hand, and they walked on in silence. Harry and Ron paused for a moment, then followed. They passed the Black Lake and could see Durmstrang's great ship moored in the distance, students in heavy leather coats standing in pairs on deck. Chunks of ice floated on the water with sharp, brittle sounds when they collided. Durmstrang must be even colder than this, Hermione observed. Ilvermorny's blue school bus sat at the edge of the forbidden forest, a crust of snow on its roof. Beauxbaton's carriage rested by the stables. The enormous Abraxan horses huddled together, their drooping wings keeping out the chill. Half an hour later, they reached Hagrid's hut. Loren removed the bubblehead charms and frowned. The wooden door was tightly shut. This isn't right. Hagrid should have finished his patrol by now. They knocked. Fang barked low from inside. Hagrid, it's us! Harry called, pounding harder. There was a muffled sound from within, Hagrid sobbing. Hermione, unable to stand it any longer, banged on the door. Hagrid, stop! We know you're in there. Stop crying over Madame Maxime. Nobody cares that your mother is a giant. Hagrid's sobs only grew louder. Loren shoved the others aside, unlocked the door with Alohomora, and Fang bolted past him, tugging at Loren's trouser leg and dragging him in. Inside, Hagrid sat at the table, face blotchy and eyes raw. He dabbed at his nose with a trembling hand. How did ye get here? He hoarsed. Hagrid, we all know, Hermione said, pulling the folded parchment from Loren's pocket and spreading it on the table. Rita Skeeter knows too. Loren summoned fresh warm air into the hut with a twirl of his wand and set out tea and cakes from his ever-portable pendant. Have a cup and tell us slowly, he said. Hagrid had finished reading. 2 big tears rolled down his cheeks, and he sobbed again. Now everyone knows I'm going to be expelled again. This came from Professor Dumbledore, Hermione called over his cries. He asked us to give it to you. The article won't be published. Besides Madame Maxime, do you think any of us care about this? Hagrid's face lit for a moment and then fell. They'll find out sooner or later, and they'll care. I shouldn't cause Dumbledore any more trouble. You're thinking of resigning? Harry grabbed his sleeve. What matters isn't whether the rest of them care. It's whether Dumbledore cares. Whether you care. Can't you see that? You wouldn't understand, Hagrid choked. You're not half giant, not even a limpy. So because Madame Maxime doesn't like you, you'll disappoint those who do, Loren snapped. His voice quieted the room. When Dumbledore wasn't yet headmaster, he faced opposition to keep you on as gamekeeper. He's done so since. Last year you became Professor of Canonical Creatures, and yes, you made mistakes, but Harry agreed to Malfoy's conditions for your sake. Are you really going to shut yourself away and let Dumbledore down over someone you've known scarcely 2 months? I'm not. Hagrid couldn't meet Loren's eyes. Tears soaked his beard. Then show it with your actions, Loren pressed. Hagrid buried his face in his large hands and sobbed. Harry and Ron each put a hand on his arm to comfort him. After a long while, he finally pulled himself up, red-eyed. You're right, he said miserably. I was foolish. If me old dad saw me like this, he'd be ashamed. Smiles returned to the 4 faces. Hagrid, wiping at his cheeks, brightened through fresh tears. Want to see a picture o' me old dad? He asked, rummaging around. I think I put it here. Hagrid's father was a short wizard, his dark eyes as bright as Hagrid's. In the photograph, he sat on Hagrid's shoulder, laughing until his eyes were slits. Judging by the apple tree beside them, Hagrid must have already been 7 or 8 feet tall then, but his face was young, full, smooth, beardless, making him look barely 11. This was taken not long after I started at Hogwarts, Hagrid said, voice thick. Dad was overjoyed. He thought I wouldn't turn out to be a wizard, because my mum. His words trailed off. Harry and Ron leaned closer to study the picture, fascinated by the sight of a beardless, boyish Hagrid. Hagrid had always been bearded since they'd known him. If he ever shaved, they probably wouldn't recognize him. Don't go on about that, Hagrid grunted, forcing a complicated smile. I've always been a bit slow with magic, I suppose, but at least he didn't see me expelled. He died while I was in my 2nd year. Loren and Hermione sat with them, listening quietly. Hermione's eyes glistened. After Dad died, Dumbledore looked out for me, Hagrid continued, voice rough with feeling. He found me a job as a gamekeeper. He gives folks a second chance. He trusts people. That's what makes him different from other headmasters. He knows someone can come from a poor background and still do great things. Some people don't understand that, though. They judge you for where you came from. Some even put on airs and won't speak plain truth. I was daft to worry so much about that woman. I shouldn't have. I promise you that. Hagrid's fists clenched beneath his beard. Big-boned, they all say. Well, I wish she'd see what big-boned really means, he muttered through his teeth. You can't blame her all the way, Hagrid, Hermione whispered gently. With her build, people notice. She faces the same sort of prejudice you do. Hagrid stared at her a heartbeat, then sighed. Even so, she became headmistress of Beauxbatons. I don't much care for her myself, but that's a remarkable thing. Hermione nodded earnestly. Think of it. Her governors, parents of students, and the famous wizards of France are watching. If the newspapers splash that the headmistress of Beauxbatons is half giant, she has to guard her reputation all the more. Can't show any weakness, Hagrid said, eyes brightening like embers in a stove. You're right, Hermione. I was too hasty. I didn't think of her feelings. Maybe I should go apologize. Loren advised. Maybe calm down and think about how. How to say it, Hagrid finished eagerly. You're right, Loren. I ought to think it over. His beard twitched with excitement. The five of them fell quiet at once. Hermione began to speak, then stopped when Loren put a hand up. This Hagrid, open, talkative, was easier company than the one who retreated into his hut. Loren poured a cup of tea and said lightly, Hagrid, tell us about the giants. Oh, no problem, Hagrid replied. There haven't been giants in Britain for many years. It goes back to the Wizarding War. Folks thought all the giants who helped you-know-who had been tried and killed, but thanks to Dumbledore's efforts, many of them survived and returned to the mountain tribes. I don't know where exactly. The leader of a tribe is called a Gugor, usually the tallest, biggest of the lot. Only by killing the previous Gugor can one become the new Gugor. That night in the Gryffindor common room, the conversation had drifted. Hermione sat on the floor by the coffee table, quills scratching neat letters across paper. Professor Babbling's Christmas divination homework was hardly much, less even than Loren's divination assignment, so Hermione couldn't understand why Loren had time to fuss with her hair behind her. Loren, she tried again. Have you finished your divination homework? Yes, Loren said calmly, dividing Hermione's hair into 3 strands and beginning to braid. It was the usual predicting fortunes rubbish, no surprise at all. Hermione frowned and glanced toward the small round table by the window, where Ron, Lavender, and Parvati were bent over unfogging the future, trying to invent new misfortunes for the semester. Harry had gone off with the golden egg and hadn't got to his homework at all, which was odd. How did you finish so quickly? I borrowed a book on healing from the library and copied the case studies. Loren looped a rubber band around the finished braid. He smelled faintly of oranges. Hermione felt an annoying flicker of jealousy that he had finished so easily while she still labored. She stuck her quill into the inkwell, turned toward him, and hummed. I can't translate this paragraph. Explain it to me. Loren slid off the sofa and curled up beside her, peering at the page. First, find the main structure of the paragraph. Hermione breathed in his scent, rested her head comfortably on his shoulder, and Loren shrugged. Be serious, Professor Morgan is lecturing, he murmured. Oh. Hermione straightened, the corner of her mouth twitching. They started with Rune's homework, but as they talked, the subject wandered. All that remained clear was the warm fireplace and soft light of the common room. Hogwarts had portraits and statues in profusion, none of them quite like the celebrity busts in Muggle schools. These wizards were remembered for curious, well-known tales. Silly Barnabas, who tried to teach trolls to dance. Boris the bungler from Hufflepuff, who was always misplacing things. His stories were used in potions and herbology safety lessons as warnings. Boris had done ridiculous things like transplant mandrakes without earmuffs and handle boobatuber pus bare-handed, and yet he lived to 93, finally succumbing to dragon pox. A statue of him stood on the 6th floor. Later, Harry stood with the heavy golden egg tucked under his arm in front of one such statue. This is the entrance Cedric mentioned? He asked. Harry found the hidden door beside the statue, leaned against it, and whispered, Fresh pineapple. The door swung open. A luxurious chandelier sprinkled warm light over a room of white marble. 100 golden faucets surrounded a rectangular bathtub large enough to swim in, complete with a diving board. Snow-white curtains and a pile of plush towels filled a corner. On the wall hung a gilded painting of a blonde merperson sleeping on a rock, her long hair clinging to her face as she breathed. Harry stepped inside, awed. It was the most extravagant bathroom he'd ever seen. He couldn't resist trying a few faucets. Before he realized it, he was naked in the tub, luxuriating as the faucets poured different bubble baths into the warm water. One spouted pink bubbles the size of footballs, another thick, pearly foam, another a violet mist that drifted across the surface. He swam a couple of slow laps, then floated back to the edge and held the golden egg up to examine it. "If I were you," a high, watery voice said, "I'd try putting it in the water." "Myrtle, when did you get here?" Harry yelped. "A little before you," Myrtle answered, blinking. The next morning in the Great Hall, the Christmas decorations still clung to the rafters. 12 Christmas trees hung star and moon-shaped ornaments that only sparkled at night. The silver frost on the walls had melted, leaving the house banners a little duller than 2 months ago. Breakfast was nearly over, and the hall was mostly empty. Loren fed a small witch, a little friend, a piece of fried sausage, then turned to Harry and Hermione. "So you've solved the golden egg riddle?" Harry shot them a betrayed look. "You knew all along, didn't you?" "Knew what?" Ron asked, curious. "That Myrtle would hide in the bathtub and peek at anyone bathing?" Loren snorted. "She saw you naked?" Harry spluttered. "There was foam in the way. She swears she closed her eyes when I got in, but I don't believe her." "Go confront Myrtle then," Loren said, grinning. "If she did see you, she ought to take responsibility." The three of them tried to suppress laughter. Harry waved a hand, exasperated. "Never mind that. Listen to the egg. Inside is a merperson's song, and you can only hear the words clearly underwater." That evening, at the Black Lake, Harry held the egg under as everyone watched. The song sang out across the cold water. "Find us where our voices sound, for on the surface we can't be found. As you search, consider with care. We have taken your most cherished treasure. You have but 1 hour's time to find and reclaim what we have stolen. After an hour, all hope is gone. It will have vanished, never to return." When Harry finished repeating the verse, a wind cut through them, and he shivered. Loren stood on the frozen surface of the lake and stamped his foot. The ice was hard as iron. His face was serious. "It's not going to be easy to fish." Ron nodded, and Hermione watched without expression. Only Harry looked frantic. "Is this really about fishing? Think. Help me find a solution. 3 weeks, and I'm supposed to spend an hour under that water." They walked across the ice until they were some 10 meters from shore, then set down 4 small stools. Harry blew on his hands and took the fishing rod Loren gave him. Loren divided the bait into 4 neat portions. "How can I breathe underwater for an hour?" Harry asked. No one answered immediately. The only sounds on the frozen lake were the soft creaks of shifting ice and distant water. Suddenly there was a sharp crack, "piercing spell," someone had called, and water splashed up through a hole, dark and swirling. Unseen fish flicked past below, tails flashing away into the depths. Loren baited his hook with practiced ease, cast, then looked up at the clear winter sky. "It's a fine day. Looks like we might catch something big." "Really?" Ron replied, casting his line. Hermione wasn't interested in fishing. She sat beside Loren and conjured a few floating blue flames to take the edge off the cold. Harry watched his friends go about it like it was some leisurely outing. He felt none of their calm. "Say something useful," he urged. "The second task. I'm supposed to go underwater and find a merperson. I have to last an hour down there." Loren kept his eyes on the float. "Neville had a book, Magical Water Plants of the Mediterranean. Remember? It mentioned gillyweed. And there's the bubblehead charm." Harry's face lit up. Hermione nodded. "We need to think about what the merpeople might have taken and how you'll get around underwater." "And what the 1-hour limit actually means," Loren added quietly. Winter sunlight lay across the ice in lazy lanes, and the conversation slowed. Distant thoughts came to Loren. If the judges meant to tie a champion's most cherished person beneath the waves and hand them over to the merpeople, and if the hour passed before rescue, that person would drown. The task was full of peril and full of holes. Loren glanced at Ron and then at Harry, remembering that Harry had chosen Ginny as his dance partner at the Yule Ball. Perhaps she might be the one to be taken. He didn't know, but the thought pressed at the back of his mind as the float bobbed gently on the chilled water.